These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll & Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
We're reading today from Warrior Is by Harley and Robin Zephyr. It's the story of their great-grandfather who, in real life, killed Custer at Little Bighorn. And in fact, there's a map of the war, as it were, the battle. And they say that he is now the spirit keeper of Custer, which is remarkable. And there's a page-and-a-half introduction to the book, and then it becomes, a historically accurate novel, basically. This story is the traditional and cultural account of the life of Nikogju Lakota warrior Mato Nyanpi, saved by Bear, which his name in English, also later known as Scarleg. Warrior is based upon a true story. What you are about to read has been told to us through our family, passed down as oral history from generation to generation. Every family has its own story. This is ours. It's up to you to visualize and experience the events described herein in order to determine what you believe or what you choose to accept from what you learn from these pages. You've likely never read a story quite like this before. In Warrior Is, the reader is able to visualize and experience the events and circumstances of Mato Nyanpi's life. Many times the story is told in the present tense, such as if you were walking with Saved by Bear and his people as the events unfold. This was our original manner of storytelling. Other times the story is narrated in the past tense to account for a past perspective. Those of us who may not be entirely fluent in particular words or specific language, as much as we may be fluent in spirit and honest communication, the life messages many times can be more meaningful than just the written or spoken words. Warrior Is follows the timeline from the time of creation, moving through Saved by Bear's birth in 1849 and going up to July 1876, 2 weeks after the Grass Battle. Please exercise your free will and follow your conscience when reading this story. The spiritual side is called upon you to open your spirit so that you may read this tale and learn about these events through your own spirit. And, continues sort of like in that line, but here, right to the book. Prologue. He smelled the yellow of the sun. His spirit was alive and energetic. He felt the energy in his chest and all along the blood running through his veins. He looked to his left to see his great friend by his side. The strong scent of sage caressed his nostrils and reminded him of home. The movement over the high-running hilly ridge to the south caught his eye. He and Swift Bear sensed and felt the pathway opening up. So much had occurred so quickly, so suddenly, so dramatically. Their call to duty, his call to duty, filled his mind, his heart, his spirit. Today, it was meant to happen. It was presented to the people from the Creator. The plan was made. The warriors summoned. The preparation was done. It all led to this place, this portal in time. The sparse clouds to the west resembled mare's tails, and for a brief moment he remembered his white stone friend in the White Mountains. He remembered his spiritual commitment to protect his people, Grandmother Earth, and the sacred His-Hapa. And time stood still for a moment, a small moment in time, through all of the ancient and original history of all the moments of time. And as the group of the horse-mounted soldiers rode briskly over the far ridge, the Creator shined that warm, nurturing light upon these warriors. Such as Creator had been doing since the beginning of time, since the beginning of Grandmother Earth and Grandfather Sky, and at the beginning of all things. All the moments of time forever had arrived here, now. It had come to this. Creator's strong will and great invisible hand had placed them here. It was the Creator all along. It always was. It always would be. For one to know what led the young Lakota warriors to be here at this fateful site near the Greasy Grass River on this warm, sun-drenched day, one must go back in time, way back to the beginning, when it was only the Creator, and the Creator of all things decided to create a new world. Her name would be Unsimaka, Grandmother Earth, and she would be created to hold and sustain life. All kinds of beings, all kinds of people would be given and placed upon and within her to show her love of life. And this is how it all began. Chapter 1, Origin. The human beings evolved from the spirit. Before arriving in Wind Cave, we were star people. Many of us came from a place called the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, an ancient star grouping and constellation that contains worlds comprised of the gift of life-giving water. Water is life. Mini Wikoni. The Pleiadian influence is an absolute, but those of us who claim to be relatives of the Pleiadians share a common bond with other indigenous people, regardless of where we are geographically on the earth. We will always remain Pleiadian star people. Spiritually, we have become human beings of different races and ethnicities, but the origin of our spirit is the water. And for us, and as to who we are, as the tribal people in a family way, our name is Minkoju, its evidence. It means life's subsistence through the gathering and planting by the waters and or river. The Minikoju spend their lives living by the waters. This is something that many of our own people do not know or understand, but this is our history. Not only of our physical...
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Happy Thursday. Well, there was some just absolutely compelling testimony in the trial of Derek Chauvin today, and we can talk about that. This physician I'll get into that in a little bit. And Joe Biden is speaking right now, speaking about gun control. Kamala Harris introduced him, talked about how he had taken on the gun lobby twice and won. And we'll get to that. And my rant today over on HartmannReport.com is all about, well, it's addressed, Dear Joe Manchin, you want American business to invest in West Virginia, raise their corporate income tax rate. And to that topic, Charles Sauer's on the line with us. He's the libertarian economist, the president of the Market Institute, the author of the book Profit Motive, What Drives the Things We Do. MarketInstitute.org is the website, and Charles Sauer, it's spelled S-A-U-E-R. At Charles Sauer is his Twitter handle. Charles, welcome back. So what's not to love about a corporate tax rate that encourages investments and higher wages? What am I missing here?
Well, you're missing all of the actual economics that go into the corporate tax rate. First and foremost, it's a tax on labor. This comes out of the pockets of labor. The best estimates put it at 20%, and that's from the Tax Policy Center. The Congressional Budget Office says it's 25%, and Larry Kotlikoff says it's likely 100% of corporate taxes come from the pockets of labor. And that means that you're not just hurting the big businesses here. What you're doing is hurting labor. You're hurting job creation, you're hurting wages, and everything else that goes with it. So the right corporate tax rate is likely 0%. Now, if you want to tax the big bad guys, we can talk about it. But through the corporate tax rate is not the way to do that.
So, Charles, is your Market Institute, is your business, if you don't mind talking about it, is it for profit or not for profit?
The Market Institute is a 501c4 nonprofit, but I also have an LLC, which is a flow-through.
Okay, so you have a small company. I have a small company, which is this show and my book writing. And what do you do at the end of the year to keep from showing a profit? Or what? I don't want to personalize this. That's not fair to you. What? You and I both run small businesses. Don't we both know that at the end of the year that December is the boom time for car dealers and who are selling or leasing vehicles to businesses, for copy salespeople, for computer salespeople, for office furniture, and the reason why is because small businesses all across America are saying, hey, I've got $10,000 left over in the checking account at the end of the year here, and I don't want to have to pay income taxes on it, so I'm gonna buy a new computer, or I'm going to invest in something. I mean, that's how it works. And it works with big business the same way. If you don't want to show a profit, you invest in R&D. Why is it that during the time when we had a top corporate income tax rate of 50%, which was from the 1940s until the 1980s, we had the time of greatest prosperity, greatest corporate growth, and greatest growth in wages in the United States. And then Reagan dropped it down to 35%, and it stood there at 35% until just 5 years ago, or 4 years ago, or maybe 3 years ago. And that 35%, encouraged at least some, I'll give you that there's a million loopholes that need to be closed, but that, the corporate tax is the pressure on a corporation to not end up with huge surpluses of cash, or not simply shovel that money out as dividends or give it to their CEOs.
I think that I disagree with almost everything you said. First off, inflation adjusted, those numbers are different. But if we look at the world and we look at the world tax rates, what Reagan did in the 80s was create a tax revolution. And not only did that allow us to have higher growth and higher job creation, but the rest of the world followed suit because capital started flowing into the U.S. And that's the goal, is you want the capital from investors to flow in so that you have more factory creation. You have more capital to create more labor. And this isn't trickle-down economics. It's just a world demand rate. As we have a world economy, money can move from country to country faster. So right now, when Reagan lowered that, we had a low tax rate, but the rest of the world followed and beat us. Asia has a lower tax rate. Europe has a lower tax rate. And now what President Trump did, and I haven't been on for a while because you and I would have agreed too much when talking about President Trump. But the fact is President Trump's tax cut made us more competitive around the world. We had tax rates that were actually the same as the OECD. If we go up to 28%, now we're multiple higher than in the OECD. That's where an investor is going to go.
Okay, so I'm looking at Andrew Ross Sorkin's, with the New York Times. He does this Deal Book newsletter every day, and it's a column in the New York Times, and I subscribe to it. And this morning's newsletter, apropos of this, has taxes levied on corporate profits as a share of GDP. And back in 1960, the U.S. and Japan were both at around 4%, and the OECD average was around 2%, and Germany was around 1.5%. Fast forward to today, and the U.S. is, the taxes levied on corporate profits as a share of gross domestic product is 1% in the U.S. In Germany, it's 2%. In Britain, it's almost 3%. The OECD average is 3.5%. Mexico is 3.5%. Canada is around 3.8%, and Japan is 4.5%. We have the lowest collection of taxes as a share of GDP, and yet all those countries are doing just fine. Thank you very much.
You can't mess up those words. Levied versus collected is a different term. And that's the whole point. Is when the Reagan cut the corporate income tax, the corporate tax rate, he actually changed it so that there were less write-offs. There was more money that was coming in because it was easier to file. It was easier to follow, but there was less business lunches deducted, less travel deducted. There was less things that you could deduct, which made it a more efficient, effective tax code that didn't incentivize corporate bigwigs spending money on expensive lunches versus paying their labor more.
Well, you know, I don't know that that's what happened during Reagan. I'll take your word for it. It's certainly what happened in '67 when LBJ lowered the top personal income tax rate from 91% down to 73% or 74% and closed so many loopholes that it actually increased collections. But I'm not sure that that's, you know, we have about a minute and a half left, Charles. My argument, again, is that as long as corporations are facing, you know, if they just keep the money or shovel it to as dividends to their shareholders, which are taxable, or as money to their CEOs, which after the first $1 million or $2 million, I forget which it is in tax code now, is taxable. Instead of doing that, they reinvest in R&D, in machinery, in expansion, in all those things. They do that. I mean, what creates the pressure for companies to do that, and certainly did during the 50 years when our top tax rate was at 50% from the 40s to the 80s, that's a good thing. That builds America.
Well, what you're saying is debatable, but we're at the kind of a lower level. If we go to a higher level, we actually need to talk about the investment coming into the U.S. and where investors take their money. And because the more capital we have, the more R&D happens, the more building of infrastructure happens. And if we have the higher tax rates, that money, that base capital goes someplace else. So, yeah, we can argue your points, but that's a second-tier issue compared to where the original money comes from.
But you know, you're arguing we need money from other countries to come into the United States. That's not even part of my equation. I'm saying we want to alter the behavior of American corporations. Sorry, go ahead.
Or money from U.S. investors. It doesn't have to come from abroad. U.S. investors' money is fungible as well. Okay.
Charles Sauer with the Market Institute. Let me get my one sheet up here. marketinstitute.org and Charles Sauer, Sauer on Twitter. Charles, thanks for dropping by today. It's always nice talking with you.
Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
15 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. I'll dig into this a little more in just a few minutes. And welcome back. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. Hey, Omar, what's on your mind today?
The Honorable Thom Hartmann, Prophet, Truth, Democracy, Justice, and the American Way. Good day to you, sir. I just wanted, when we were told that corporations are people, that was the point so they need to pay tax. The bottom line is the corporation are not paying their fair share of taxes. And it's something that the Biden administration really have to look into because just not paying taxes, it's going to affect the economy. It's going to affect the government. It's going to affect everybody. So when you have corporations are cheating not to pay taxes so they can pay more dividend to their investors, that's not fair. People are taxed. Anybody need a tax credit right now is the middle class. And Biden really have to address this issue because it's something that's not being fairly looked at all. Even during Trump administration, they got taxed everywhere. They were making billions, and they can afford it. They can afford it. They have money. They can afford it. They made billions of dollars. And you got like 80% of the wealth owned by 400 families. Tax them. So I have to say, Tom, thank you.
I'm with you. It's kind of a somewhat different issue, Omar, than the corporate tax. And the argument that I'm making is pretty straightforward, that businesses don't like to pay taxes. And, nobody likes to pay taxes, and businesses in particular don't like to pay taxes. So if you don't like to pay taxes, how do you get out of paying taxes? Well, it's pretty straightforward. Don't show a profit or reduce your profit. I mean, the corporate tax is actually progressive. So the higher your profit, the more your tax is. And so it's straightforward stuff. As I said, every small business person in America knows this. It's just the average person doesn't. The average person thinks that, when you say, the corporate tax rate income tax rate is going up, people think, oh my God, corporations are going to be hit with like some kind of surcharge or something. And that's not actually how it works. If a corporation is doing $100 billion worth of business and showing $1 billion in profit, they're only taxed on that $1 billion in profit. And there are all kinds of ways that they can cut that $1 billion profit down to zero. The main one being building new factories, paying their workers better, developing new products, doing R&D. All these things are 100% tax deductible. And some of them, in fact, even have tax benefits that echo into the future, you know, with the opportunity for depreciation. So I realize, you know, it can sound kind of wonky, but it's really, really very simple. If you want businesses to invest in their own business, to grow their own business, rather than simply just suck it dry, which has been increasingly the business model since the changes of the Reagan era. If you want that business to grow, if you want that business to pour its money back into the business rather than, like, you know, the Walton family taking $100 billion out of Walmart, although Walmart has done a pretty good job of reinvesting, but still, if you want your business to grow, the straightforward, simple way to do it is to take the money that you have left over at the end of the year, the so-called profit, and put that profit back into the company. And this is what businesses have been doing forever. And the corporate income tax, which started in the 19-teens, either 1913 or 1918, I forget which. I think it was 13. That corporate income tax has been one of the biggest pressures on companies to reinvest, in my humble opinion. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back. I'm just going to tighten up this rant a little and touch a few other topics and and then I'll pick up your phone calls. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So a while ago at Davos, Michael Dell, the computer billionaire who started out selling computers out of his dorm room in college. I was running CompuServe forums back in the day. This is in the late 70s or the early 80s, and he was selling them on CompuServe in my forums. And, you know, now he's worth billions. And somebody asked him, you know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is proposing a 70% tax bracket for people who make the kind of money you make. What do you think of that? And his response was, a 70% tax rate? Name a country where that ever worked. Ever. And it turns out there is such a country, and apparently Michael Dell didn't know this. I think a lot of Americans don't know this, that there was a country that had its greatest period of prosperity in its entire history with a top tax rate that was above 70%. In fact, it hit 90% for more than half the time. And that was the United States of America. It's a new video over at ThomHartmann.com. So let me just lay this out in a fairly, you know, straightforward fashion, and you know, make my argument. Again, I mean, I sort of made it with Charles, but and then I'll pick up your phone calls on this. There's also a few other things in the news that I want to get to too. That yeah, we're hearing from Anne Frank's stepsister about Donald Trump, for example, and well, I'll get to those things in a minute. But you know, most Americans have never run a business. The number of people in this country who are entrepreneurs who have started businesses is fairly small. I mean, it's substantial compared to countries that don't allow that sort of thing, but you know, it's not a lot of people. So most people, never having run a business, don't understand how the corporate income tax works. The corporate income tax is very straightforward. At the end of the year, you say, okay, this year we brought in, you know, $100,000 in revenue, and we had $70,000 in expenses that, you know, that we paid to salaries or to expenses or what, you know, that are all tax deductible. And so what's left over, and it's basically, for a small business, is literally what's left over in your checking account at the end of the year. We're sitting here with $30,000 sitting in the checking account, and we don't want to pay taxes on it. So what do? We buy a new computer, or we lease a vehicle. You know, we raise our expenses in a way, or we invest in the company, or we develop a new product, or we hire a marketing firm and we start doing advertising or promotion. These are all things that are entirely tax deductible. What's going on right now with this super low tax rate is that businesses are engaged in activity that is taxable. In other words, shoveling money to their CEOs. There's a tax consequence to that to companies over, after the first million, as I recall, and paying dividends. This is taxable activity as well. But because the tax rate is so low, much of the profits that companies, in particular big companies, have, if they can't stash it overseas, offshore, which is something that the Biden administration is talking about, tightening up that loophole so they can't get away with that anymore. But if they can't do that, what they do is they just take that, because it's a very low tax rate. Hey, we'll pay the 5 or 10 or 15%, with a 21% top tax rate right now. The effective rate, it drops dramatically because of all the loopholes and things. So yeah, we'll pay a little bit of tax on that money, but it'll allow us to take the money out of the business. You raise that corporate tax rate up to, say, 50%, where it was from the 1940s to the 1980s, or even 35%, where Reagan said it, and it stayed until just a few years ago. You raise it up into that range, 35 to 50%, and at that point, companies say at the end of the year, if we just shovel all this money out as dividends and CEO pay, we're going to have to pay a fairly big tax bill. We don't want to do that. So let's instead support the local Little League and build parks around our factory or our warehouse or our business to benefit the local community. It's tax deductible. Or let's invest in advertising or marketing, or let's develop a new product. Joe Manchin is going through this whole thing about how, I'm not going to support increasing corporate taxes beyond 25%. And I get that there's politics here, and I get that West Virginia is kind of a it's a very red state, and he's got to answer to the people who put him in Congress. I get all that. This is not any kind of personal knock on Joe Manchin. But the point is that the economics of this, if you actually want businesses to invest in West Virginia, if you want businesses that are currently in West Virginia to grow their businesses and hire new people, then raise the corporate taxes. It's very, very straightforward. A couple other things I wanted to share with you that I think are pretty shocking. First of all, the Biden administration today taking action on guns. And if you'd like to get into a rant or a debate about guns, feel free. The Justice Department says that they're going to crack down on ghost guns. These are the ones made from kits assembled at home. They have no serial numbers. They're going to crack down on braces that turn pistols into shotguns effectively, or short-barreled rifles. They're going to the Justice Department is going to offer model red flag legislation to the states. So if Congress won't pass a law, that gives, when the red flag goes up, somebody is, convicted or even charged with, a restraining order is issued against somebody for domestic violence. That should be a red flag that person shouldn't have a gun. They're going to offer that. They're ordering 5 different federal agencies to direct vital support to community violence intervention programs as quickly as possible. And he's putting forward David Chipman, an old ATF agent, as the head of the ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And Chipman has spent the last year or so as an advisor to Americans for Responsible Solutions, which is Gabby Gifford's gun control group. So I think that we're moving in a really good direction. And in fact, Mr. Garland, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General at the moment, is addressing the nation, saying, we at the Justice Department are going to be doing something about this as well. So the Biden administration, to me, seems to be firing on all cylinders. The problem right now is in the Senate. And because Republicans have said they're not going to have anything to do with any negotiations, including the jobs plan, now you've got Democratic senators negotiating with each other, for better or for worse.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. Stick around.
Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit Mercenaries for White Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amax, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980 because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum Number 39. The strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so the South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. And what a remarkable day, huh? Herb in Pontiac, Michigan. Hey, Herb, what's up?
Hi. Your Sauer there, he doesn't understand economics. You're spot on. I had a distribution business. I ran a 7-Eleven for almost 20 years. And they don't seem to understand that the consumer is the job creator. The more money people have in their pockets, the more they buy, the more demand, and so people have got to get stuff, and so they create more capacity, more jobs.
And what does that have to do with the corporate income tax rate?
Well, you're right on with the corporate income tax rate, because when it is higher, they're going to reinvest. Because right now we have CEOs that are a bunch of Scrooge McDucks. All they do is hoard the money. You got to circulate the money. The money has got to come back to the people through good wages, so the people can go out and buy the products they want to sell. Everybody
right, and good wages are 100% tax deductible. So let me just do a reality check with you, Herb. You've been You've been a small business owner for several decades. At the end of the year, if you're operating on a calendar year for your business, which most small businesses do, at the end of the year or at the end of your fiscal year, as the case may be, do you find yourself looking at how much money you've got left over and thinking, okay, I don't want to pay taxes on that, so I'm going to put that money back into my business. I'm going to buy some new equipment, or I'm going to give my employees a raise, or I'm going to hire a new person?
I put my money back into my employees throughout the year, because the happier the employees are, the happier the customers are, and more business comes through that way. I figured I can live on just a certain amount and make everybody happy, because I've been an employee and an employer.
There you go. Herb, thank you very much for the call. Andy in Wilmington, Delaware. It looks to me like you want to disagree on that point, Andy.
Well, I just want to tweak it a little bit, Tom. First of all, no matter what the corporate tax rate is, not one more job is going to be created unless there is an increased demand for the product or service of that company. So if you have a higher corporate tax rate, if there's no need to reinvest other than to I don't want to give the government that money, you might be able to invest in equipment or invest in say, property to build a new building or something like that. But it doesn't make sense for the individual business owner to invest in human beings or anything.
Well, there's a supply side argument on the other side of that, Andy, and that is that if you invest in a new product, you develop a whole brand new product line that you will find, like when Apple came out with the iPhone, when Steve Jobs said, okay, we're not just making computers anymore, we're making iPhones. And that product creates a certain amount of demand.
Okay, so R&D does make increase in investment in R&D. That's what you facilitate by increasing
exactly
corporate tax rate.
And not just R&D, and then once you've developed the product, manufacturing it, marketing it, bringing it to market, distributing it, selling it.
Okay.
All those things are tax deductible activities.
the immediate effect, Tom, of increasing that rate will be realized down the line. It'll take a couple of years of those reinvestments.
I agree.
To realize maybe some increased employment opportunities. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely agree. But what baffles me, Andy, is why people who know, I mean, these people in politics and economists who have, they know that from the 1940s until I think 85, 86, the top corporate income tax rate was 50% in the United States throughout that period. And that was the period of greatest growth in both business and wages in the history of America. And then Reagan dropped it down to 35%, and growth started slowing down a little bit. And then Trump drops it down to 21%, and growth goes through the floor. Now, that may have had something to do with COVID, I'll give you that, but, he did it three years ago. And it just, how can they not look at these numbers and say, "Oh my God, it'll be a business holocaust if we raise the corporate tax rate to 28%," when it's been 35% since the 80s and it was 50% since the 40s?
So I can answer that, Tom, and that is your differentiation is long-term planning as opposed to the short, quick buck.
Yeah, and knowing knowing that the tax rate is where it is and it's fairly high and it's going to stay there will cause companies to do that long-term planning and invest in R&D and new development. Yeah, got it. Andy, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. From Andy to Andy. This is Andy in Vancouver, Washington. Hey, Andy, what's up?
How's it going, Tom?
Good.
Anyway, what I was thinking was, so your initial debater was saying is a complete misnomer, but if we're going to talk about corporate taxes, let's meet them halfway. Let's go ahead and lower the tax rate. It's 21%. That's fine. Let's cut it to 15. Then what we do is instead of giving them business expenses 100% tax deduction, we cut that to 50 so that they actually have skin in the game for running their business. We also, you also stated with the previous gentleman that 100% of wages were tax deductible. That's incorrect. Only 80% is tax deductible. The 100% that is tax deductible is if you use temporary employees, because then it's considered a service.
Thank you for the correction. I was unaware of that.
No, that's okay. And we could also to incentivize employment, we could raise the employment to 90%. But we can't,
or take it to 100%.
As taxpayers, if we constantly we support business all the way through, and then they act like we don't do anything for them, and they did it all themselves. And then they try to get
baffled
out of
though by your
that they can.
Andy. I guess I'll have to talk to our tax guy, but as far as I know, we deduct our wages 100%. Are there different rules for big businesses?
Unless that changed under Trump's tax code, his tax breaks that he put through. Prior to that, it was 80% of wages that you pay to your employees was 80% of it was a tax deduction.
Okay. Well, I'll have to look into that.
But I haven't actually done taxes for a while, so like 4 or 5 years. So.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I appreciate it. Thank you for the call. George in Los Angeles. Hey, George, you wanted to talk about guns?
Yes, Mr. Hartmann. I thought I took you up on your offer to jump in there. I just wanted to say real fast, I don't have a gripe with really, common sense gun control. I don't have a problem with that. My issue is this, Tom, and that's I'm afraid we're heading towards a slippery slope of demonizing inanimate objects as if they're evil in and of themselves, when these things defend the gentle from the cruel, the weak from the strong. And it's foolish. You don't disarm in the face of evil. It's a dangerous uranium or plutonium is an inanimate object, but it will kill you. There are some inanimate objects. There's a lot of inanimate objects that we ban. In the realm of guns, we ban fully automatic weapons. We ban cannons. We ban surface-to-air missiles. I mean, there's all kinds of weapons that you cannot own in the United States, and they're inanimate objects. I think your argument, George, is kind of specious. radium and guns, that's apples and oranges, but like.
Well, that's why I changed my argument to guns. And I just gave you an example. You can't own a sawed-off shotgun.
I don't want my neighbor having a rocket or a machine gun. I'm just saying that, by the way, I just got done reading the definitive book on the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Somebody called and criticized me the next day from the last time I was on. I actually read relentlessly on the Holocaust. Bear Mark, B-E-R Mark, Bear Mark, the definitive scholar on the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, 1958, I believe, was written. It was actually much more involved than I had realized. The point that they made, the actual fighters in Warsaw, was that the moral thing it did for the Jews, they finally were all killed. But all the other uprisings, nothing else happened until they did. And also just the sense of human dignity and that life is worth fighting for. You don't let little children.
Yeah, George, if you're trying to make the argument that if our government ever turns into a Nazi government, the only defense against that is going to be for all of us to be armed, I'm not buying it, and I don't see where it has. I'm just not buying it. And beyond that, the Nazis seem to be the one who have the most weapons right now, not the people who are anti-fascist, but it's the fascists. So I'm not getting it, George.
Well, yeah, but
I'm sorry.
Okay, but again,
I'm not buying it.
What do you do when little children? What do you do? Little children are being hauled off to Auschwitz. You just stand there and twiddle your thumbs and
you don't let it get that far. When you see that your president is talking like a fascist, you vote him the hell out, which is exactly what we did last year.
I agree with you.
We got him out. And I mean, you're never, no matter how well armed you are, George, you're never going to be able to take on the U.S. Army. So what we need to do is make sure that the guy who is the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Army is not a fascist. We had a fascist for 4 years. He nearly changed America into a fascist government. And no guns would have stopped that, and no guns would have, I mean, it's, George, I got to run, I'm sorry. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back. Guns, taxes, nothing like a little hot topic. Stick around. And we had another mass shooting just yesterday. It's incredible. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the true people's media. We'll be right back. And welcome back. George in Portland. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Charles's argument, I missed the part of it, so forgive me if he explained this, but his main argument seems to be that the burden of the corporate tax hike would go to labor. Did he explain why and how that would happen?
No. I'm assuming what he meant. Well, actually, no, he never explained that. I thought where he was going to go with that was that labor, that basically corporate taxes would be passed along to consumers, and consumers are also laborers, or some sort of circular logic like that. But I'm not sure he ever explained it in a way that I understood, George.
That's an important point because that was his primary argument there.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, I don't get it either, and I probably should have drilled down a little more on that. That's an excellent point, George. Thank you. You don't bat 1,000. Rick in Great Falls, Montana. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind today?
Well, it appears to me that it doesn't make much difference whether the corporate tax rate is 5% or 50%. They're going to get the same return on their investment. All they're going to do is take that tax and add it on to the consumer.
Well, maybe. I mean, that assumes that they're a monopoly and they are not in a competitive marketplace. And I'll give you that there are a few companies that fall into that category. But most companies have competitors. And if they just want to pass taxes along to their consumers, they're going to find themselves uncompetitive. And so instead, what they should do is lower their tax liability by investing in their employees or investing in their business.
Absolutely, yeah. But just like the Koch brothers, they got $800 million a year to put into a campaign. They certainly don't want to pay their employees anymore.
Yeah, well, sadly, I mean, I think that's kind of not quite a good example of business, because what you have there is ideologues who are draining their business or their own personal wealth, for that matter, to fund political campaigns and political activities, and that's going to happen regardless of what the corporate income tax rate is at. I mean, you've got a couple of Coca-Cola has come out and said, yeah, raise it to 28%. We're down with that. I'm pretty sure AT&T was another company that said that. I may be wrong, but there were several companies now that are on the record as supporting this tax increase. FedEx might have been one of them. I'd have to go back and look, but there's several companies that are like, yes, we desperately need infrastructure in the United States. Raise the corporate tax rate and pay for the infrastructure. That will, by the way, stimulate more business activity, just like the Eisenhower highway system did.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I agree.
Okay. Yep, Rick, thank you for the call. I mean, this is the I think fairly straightforward part of this is that, and something I never even got into with Charles, is that the money from that tax increase, the $2.5–3 trillion that President Biden is proposing we raise in taxes, in corporate taxes, that money is going to be used to rebuild our highways, our bridges, our airports, our rail systems, our broadband, right across the country. All kinds of really cool stuff is going to happen as a result of this. And that's going to stimulate business activity, which is going to stimulate more tax collection, which is also going to, grow the economy. Anyhow, 49 minutes coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be back with more of your calls and my rants in just a minute. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Gary in Overland Park. Whoops, click the button right. Gary in Overland Park, Kansas. You are on the air, Gary.
Yeah, Tom, I think your statement today about corporate taxes was great. I think that the multiplier effect will kick in as corporations start to hire steel workers to build factories. When those steel workers then get paid more, they go out and buy homes, they buy appliances. The people that make those appliances get jobs. It basically creates a snowball effect in terms of increasing the way the economy works. The second thing I'd point out is that when the average worker gets $100 extra, he'll spend $99 of that and probably save $1, and that $99 will stimulate the economy. If you give $100 to a billionaire, he might spend $20 of it, and he'll take the remaining $80 and hoard it in an offshore account where it will be unproductive. So basically what you're doing by increasing that corporate tax rate is you are giving a shot of adrenaline to the economy, totally unlike Governor Sam Brownback of Kansas, who claimed that giving billionaires tax breaks would give a shot of adrenaline to the economy, and instead it tanked the Kansas economy. So
That's right. You guys were the test case for the company, because Brownback, who used to be a Republican right-wing Tea Party senator, is now your governor, and he came in and said, okay, in fact, he said it right out loud. He said, we're going to run a test of Reaganomics, of supply-side economics, right here in Kansas, and he radically cut taxes and said, this is going to increase revenue. And you tell us what happened, Gary.
Well, the economy tanked, the state government tanked, there wasn't money for schools. It was just a disaster. The only people in Kansas who profited that were the Koch Industries people in Wichita. Who
were probably largely responsible for Brownback's political career.
I think so. In addition to the economic, if you're a spiritual person, there's even biblical support for all this. The love of money, the pathological desire to hoard money by billionaires is the root of all evil. Basically, they've used that money and that wealth to oppose fighting climate change. They've used that to avoid fighting the war against poverty. they've used that to avoid dealing with drug trafficking. There's just a whole host of reasons why they create problems for the economy when they hoard this money. And by having a high corporate tax rate, you bring it all back to the center issue of circulating money, which is the key to all this. Money is like, it's the blood flow of the economy. If you put all your blood to the head and none to the legs, you're going to develop gangrene in the legs. And basically, we're doing that with our economy. We're sending all the money to the top 1% at the head, and the legs that do all the work and support the body are being starved of money or starved of blood or the lifeblood, and they're developing gangrene. And you have huge pockets of poverty, drug abuse, violence. All of that can exist, but it's a matter of degree. It greatly increases when the concentration of wealth squeezes everyone, and people's problems just multiply.
Brilliant, Gary. You should write a column about it. You said all of that so well and so clearly. Just brilliant. Gary, I got to run, but thank you so much for the call. Richard in Chicago. Hey, Richard, what's up?
Well, about we keep hearing if you own guns, it would have stopped the Nazis. Is so ridiculous. It's just big. It took us with millions of people in the army 5 years, and plus the Allies about 6 or 7 years with the Russians to defeat the Germans. I had relatives
with massive armies.
I'm sorry. Yes.
I said with massive armies. Forgive the interruption, Richard. Finish your story.
No problem. You're exactly right. Even the small ones, they were fighting. Jews fought. This idea they didn't, but if you killed one Nazi, they killed 100 people in your town. This idea is just so baseless. I wish people would examine it better. I don't know. It's a small point on what was being said, but I'm just. People just don't. I mean, it's a matter of faith nowadays in our country. It's just unbelievable.
It is the 2020 version or the 2021 version of the only thing that'll stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, which was also a fantasy and has never been actually shown to exist in the real world outside of the occasional anecdote that is the exception that proves the rule. I'm totally with you. Richard, excellent. Thank you very much for the call. I appreciate it. Ron in Dallas, Texas. Hey, Ron, what's up?
Hey, I had a thought on some of this that I wanted to see what you thought about, and it may have been discussed before and I missed it, but with the corporate taxes or voting rights, gun control, filibuster, whatever it is, there always seems to be one or two Democratic senators that are the obstacle to it, and whether it be Manchin or Sinema. I think Joe Biden should aggressively put his efforts into D.C. statehood on the idea that we would likely get 2 more Democratic senators there. So then we would ultimately end up back at worst-case scenario of 52-52 split, even if Manchin and Sinema voted with the Republicans, and then Kamala Harris would be the vote tiebreaker.
Yeah, and there is an argument to be made that statehood, for D.C. at least, can be added. I'd like to add Puerto Rico too, but that's going to be a more complex process. But that it could be argued, and I'm guessing that the Democrats are arguing this right now with the Senate parliamentarian, that it should not be subject to the filibuster because it is a constitutional process, and the Constitution specifies that it's a simple majority, or fails to specify that it requires a supermajority, and because it's a simple constitution. Go ahead, Ron.
But even if that can't do it through reconciliation, I think Manchin and Sinema or whoever would be on the Democratic side would be very hard pressed not to agree to go ahead and get rid of the filibuster, at least for D.C. statehood vote, because that would put them in a horrible situation to say we're not going to get rid of the filibuster and we don't think these people should have the right.
Well, I'm not sure. I think that there's a large contingent of basically white racist voters in both Arizona and West Virginia who are probably opposed to D.C. statehood. And this is something that Fox News, they'll talk about D.C. statehood and throw pictures of black people up on the screen. I'm not sure they could get around it. We'll see. Ron, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll & Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee, instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had master slaves, feudalism had lord serfs, and monarchy had king subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us is Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of Democracy at Work, author of numerous books. His most recent, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, now also available as an ebook. DemocracyAtWork.info and rdwolff with 2fs.com are his websites. You can tweet him at Prof Wolff, as in Professor Wolff, PROFWOLFF. And Professor Wolff, welcome back. There's this fascinating piece on Axios the other day, and I believe Sean shared it with you this morning, that there's like these two competing narratives about growth. One is that, growth is a great thing because it increases prosperity and it increases the probability that you'll have new technologies that will be less carbon dependent, and over time growth will actually lead to a cleaner world. And then there's the other argument that no, you've got to stop growth because growth is causing pollution and causing social problems, and it's making us, impinge on native areas that, or virgin forest and jungle and things which bring diseases into the human society. And there's other arguments, economic arguments as well. And I'm curious your thoughts on growth versus degrowth and these two movements.
Well, for me, the problem is putting this in that either-or frame. It's really not, for me, a question of growth versus degrowth, but a question of what the objectives of an economic system are. That's the problem. We don't really have neither a public discussion about that nor any chance for a democratic decision by all the people, one person, one vote, as what we want our economy to do for us. But let me get to the core economics of it. The way the capitalist economic system that we have works is it has an ultimate goal. It's called profit. Profit is the bottom line. Profit is what a manager of a corporation is judged on. If the profit goes up, well, then you get rewarded. And if the profit goes down, you get punished. Ultimately, if profit goes down long enough, you go into bankruptcy and the entire enterprise ends. Once you have an economic system that works like that, it follows very strictly logically that you have to expand because your competitors are expanding, and if you don't do the same, they will have an advantage. Being bigger, their profit will be greater, they will be able to innovate with new machines. You, because your profit isn't so big, won't be able to do that, etc., etc. Every business school in this country teaches its students that when you go out there, sure, you can have social concerns and you can be a good churchgoer and all the rest, but profit is the name of the game, and that's what you do. Once you have a system set up like that, growth is built in. Capitalism has been good at growing because it has to, because that's its organization. What we now have is a slowly developing recognition that that growth is good and necessary for capitalism, but not at all good and necessary for those of us who live in this system. And the clearest example is the climate issue, the ecological damage that this growth has done. But I would add other considerations. Having a fruitful job for everybody, that ought to be part of what an economy does. Having a decent income and not having extremes of wealth and inequality, that's also a better way to organize a society. And I could go on, giving opportunity to people who have been denied it, making sure that education is a lifelong opportunity for people as part of the job, making sure child care is available so that people who have jobs do not have to worry that they're shortchanging their children. On and on and on. If we had a society that took these considerations into its consciousness and made their decisions that way, we wouldn't be having a conversation either growth or no growth. We would have growth as one objective among many, but we would be making decisions about all of them, and in many cases we would shorten the amount of growth in order to make more quality or the climate or all the other issues that a complex society cares about.
It sounds like you're describing the social democracies of Scandinavia and Northern Europe, where capitalism is heavily regulated and the society is the first priority as opposed to profit, or at least a very high priority. Do I have that right?
Absolutely. They've taken steps in that direction. By the way, they still allow private capitalism. They still allow the profit motive to be the guiding bottom line driver of what happens. But you're right. They have developed the political organization and the consciousness to say that kind of system has to be hedged about with all kinds of limits, rules, regulations, a big role for the government that is subject to democratic influences from the people, and so on. They have taken steps in that direction that the United States, the United Kingdom, and other countries have not yet figured out that they need to do as well.
Yeah. So in the previous hour, I had a debate with a libertarian economist and about corporate income taxes. Joe Biden is proposing to raise the corporate income tax from 21% to 28%. It was at 50% from the 1940s until the 1980s, the period of greatest wage growth in the history of the United States and the period of greatest business expansion in our country. I was making the argument that that corporate tax rate, in order to avoid paying income taxes on profits, corporate income taxes on profits, companies would depress their profits by investing in the company and paying their employees well. And he was making the argument that that's not the case, I suppose. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Well, I think the basic issue is you're quite right, Tom. There's no question that higher corporate taxes were associated in the post-World War II period with much faster rates of growth, that the corporate sector pushed heavily for taxes to be lowered in the name of job creation and economic growth. And the reality, the empirical reality is when they got their tax cuts, they did not invest them in economic growth. There were, of course, many reasons for them. They mostly invested them in raising corporate pay packages and paying off their stockholders with dividends and all the rest. But here's the bottom line. If you cut taxes on corporations, you're leaving them with the money to decide how to use it. Sometimes they will use it in the ways you hope. Other times, they will use it in the ways you decry. The recent period, they've used it in the way they want, which is to beef up their mergers, to beef up their dividends, and all the rest. In a capitalist system, private enterprise has the final say. And all the government does with raising and lowering taxes is try to influence it without being able to make sure that what we want as a society is what these corporations do. And if I could say a word about President Biden, he's proposing a 28%, as you rightly say. But the agreement in Washington is quite clear that he won't get that. He'll get something less than that, depending on the usual Republican-Democratic bargaining. So we will end up having come back less than halfway to the enormous tax cut given by Trump in December of 2017. And that tax cut, let's remember, an enormous gift to corporations and the rich, came at the end of a 40-year period of redistributing wealth upwards. I'm disappointed, and I think it needs to be said.
Thank you. Amen. Professor Richard Wolff. His latest book, The Sickness is the System, democracyatwork.info. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff. Professor Wolff, thank you.
Thank you as well, Tom.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We will be right back. It's 15 minutes past the hour. More of the news of the day and your calls after this. And welcome back. Steve in Simi Valley, California. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thank you for taking my call. You had a gentleman talking to you before about the Holocaust and gun control. Just to set the record straight on this, first of all, I am Jewish, but I work at the Holocaust Museum here in Southern California, and I give a lot of lectures and tours on the Holocaust. And basically, I work with a lot of Holocaust survivors, and I talked to them about that, and there's not a one that said if they had a gun, it would make a difference, because they knew that they were no match for the Wehrmacht. The Wehrmacht would come into town with lightning speed, and there was nothing they could do about it. So I just wanted to set that record straight on. They would know better than anybody else because they've lived through it.
Steve, thank you for that from an authoritative source. So, it used to be that the NRA was peddling this myth that the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is for a good guy to have a gun. We look at the statistics over time and find that that's complete BS. And so now they've rolled out this, the only way to stop a Nazi government is for all the citizens to be armed. And you're saying, as a guy who works at a Holocaust museum in California, or the Holocaust Museum in California, and has interviewed numerous Holocaust survivors, that that's also complete BS. Do I have that right, Steve?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can't say it any more better. So anyway, I just I wanted to make that plain. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
You made it very well, and I truly appreciate it. Thank you, Steve. Gina in Sebastopol, California. Hey, Gina, what's up?
Oh, thank you so much for taking my call. I just have a few quick points. First of all, I agree with you wholeheartedly about what the program is so far, especially that last caller. Oh my God, those people couldn't fight those Nazis.
Right.
First of all, I just wanted to say Dan Ellsberg has turned 90 years old, and he was our initial whistleblower, and I have a lot to thank him. I met him. I marched with him. We were at Vandenberg together in 81 and 83. I also wanted to say that we've got to keep in mind, all of us listeners, that we must, as far as getting rid of the pandemic, we must inoculate the whole world and make it free. We cannot let the poor people of the world suffer this COVID, because
you mean
inoculate
against COVID? Yeah.
It doesn't recognize boundaries. So that's what I wanted to say.
Well, and what's going on in much of the third world, particularly in Brazil right now, which is one of the, you could argue whether they're a third world country or not, but Brazil is one of the few countries in the world that is being led by a guy who says, no, don't worry, be happy. You know, it's this COVID thing is nothing to worry about. He and Trump, I think, were the only two leaders who were saying, I'm not going to do anything about this. I don't care about this. It's not my job. And now you've got 4,000 people a day dying in Brazil. I think we're down to 200 or 300 a day in the United States now. And it's just, I mean, it's incredible
Well, I mean, it's Chinese world commerce. I mean, in my line of work, people get on planes and travel.
Yeah, you're right.
You
Gina,
can't do
thank
that
you.
right now.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And or even engage in more local, commercial activities like going to a restaurant. Gina, thank you very much. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be shortly. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back in about 1 minute. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So remember back in 2020 when in California, Uber and Lyft were pouring all kinds of money into Prop 22, which basically would allow them to continue claiming that their drivers weren't actually employers of Uber. They were actually contract workers. They were all independent small businesses, and therefore the company didn't have to pay for unemployment insurance, didn't have to pay for workman's compensation if somebody got injured, didn't have to offer them any health insurance. In fact, basically couldn't even do it. And there's a whole bunch of other benefits that are associated and protections that you actually get, state and federal protections that you get as an employee that you do not have available to you as a contractor. Well, it passed because of millions of dollars from Uber, and now the fallout is happening. Companies across California are starting to fire their workers and telling them, we'll hire you back. I give examples in our new video over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back, 21 minutes past the hour. Just a little geeky science thing here and some thoughts on this. We've been talking about guns today. This research was just published in the Lancet. Lancet Psychiatry actually is the journal that the Lancet is, of course, the British medical journal that is one of the world's most famous. What they found, this was an observational study of 230,000 patient health records. And what they found was that overall, the estimated incidence of being diagnosed with a neurological or mental health disorder following COVID-19 infection was 34%, about a third of all people. This is looking at them months later. About a third of all people who have COVID are now being diagnosed with mental disorders, neurological or psychiatric disorders. That includes, and for 13% of those people, it was their first recorded diagnosis of this type. This includes, and then they talk about what happened, among those people who had COVID, 6 out of 1,000 of them had brain hemorrhage. 2.1 out of 100, 2 out of 100 had an ischemic stroke, and 7 out of 1,000 experienced dementia. And so then they go on to say a neurological or psychiatric diagnosis occurred in 38% of those who had been admitted to the hospital, 46% of those in intensive care, and 62% of those who had delirium during their COVID infection. Now, I raise that in the context of guns in a purely speculative way to ask the question, is it possible that one of the reasons that we're starting to see a spike in mass gun crimes is that if you take a population of 340 million people and with 400 or 500 million guns and you infect, I think we're at 30 million COVID infections now in the United States. I might be off a little bit by that, but say you infect 30 million people with a disease that causes 1/3 of them to have mental illness after they recover. So you now have 10 million people who are experiencing psychiatric distress or neurological disorders. And those 10 million people are living in a gestalt that is awash, in a country that is awash in guns. What comes out of that? I mean, I'm wondering, the guy who killed the police officer, ran into that barrier in Washington, D.C. and jumped out with a knife. Now, that wasn't a gun death, but, there were 2 deaths there, the person who committed the crime himself and the police officer that he killed. Did that guy have COVID? I've not seen whether he did or didn't, or at any point in the news media. It's like, have we set ourselves up, or more correctly, did Donald Trump set us up by trying to create this herd immunity, by trying to have as many people in America infected as possible, which was actually a goal of the Trump administration in the last 6 months of the administration, when they brought or maybe the last 4 months, when they brought Dr. Scott Atlas in. If you look at COVID infections over time, you see that there was this massive spike in November and December in the United States. That's this huge peak. Well, that was when Donald Trump was pushing people to ignore COVID and go back to work and rebuild the economy. And of course, he was doing that because he wanted the economic numbers to look better so that he would get reelected. He knew that presidents who preside over recessions don't get reelected. And so, he had I was going to say hidden agenda, but it wasn't so hidden. I mean, he came right out and said it. He wants the economy to get going, and the only way to do that is to get people back into the workplace. And you don't need a mask, you don't need to worry, et cetera, et cetera. And now the consequence of this is that we've got people who are disabled and now mentally disabled. There's a lot of people who are physically disabled. They have heart damage, they have lung damage, they have brain damage. All because Donald Trump decided that the best way to win re-election was by pushing people back to work in the middle of the world's worst pandemic in a century. I mean, it's pretty mind-boggling. And meanwhile, now the Biden administration, and I think this is probably fairly wise, particularly when you've got, a massive increase in mental health disorders in the United States, some provoked by this disease, some provoked by simply being locked down for a year. A lot of people are just melting down. It's a very, very difficult time. I mean, just kind of a universally difficult time. And I think that we should be talking about this, frankly, that, Donald Trump, in his effort to get himself reelected and get as many Americans infected as possible, nearly turned us into Brazil. Jair Bolsonaro is turning Brazil into Brazil. I mean, creating just and by the way, we now have 2 major mutations that have come out of Brazil. There will no doubt be others. Wherever this disease runs rampant, you see these mutations emerging, and the mutations tend to be more deadly and more contagious. And this is all the result of this bizarre ideology that, it doesn't matter what happens to frontline workers. It doesn't matter what happens to workers in general, because there's always more people willing to throw themselves into the workforce, desperate for a little income, right? So let's just kill off a few people, right? It's sociopathic, and now has become problematic for our society. We'll be back. Your thoughts after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Coming up on 28 minutes past the hour, it's the Thom Hartmann Program, fair and only slightly unbalanced.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Under the Influence, Putting Peer Pressure to Work by Robert H. Frank. And I'm reading from the prologue. That we are more closely connected to one another than most of us realize is an old idea. An important variation dates from 1929, when Hungarian writer Frigyes Karinthy published a short story entitled Chains. Two of the story's main characters speculate that any two living people can be connected by a chain involving no more than 5 acquaintances. That some such chains exist is hardly surprising, since most of us can think of people in distant locations to whom we're connected through a small number of intermediaries. The man bites dog aspect of Karinthy's conjecture is that almost any two people, A and E, could be linked by a chain like A knows B, B knows C, C knows D, who knows E. One of the first systematic attempts to test this claim came in the 1960s with a series of experiments by the psychologist Stanley Milgram. In it, he sent packages containing a small booklet to 96 people chosen at random from the Omaha, Nebraska telephone directory. His cover letter asked them to try to forward the booklet to a specific residence of Boston, Massachusetts, through a chain of personal acquaintances. He told them the name and address of the Boston resident, that he worked as a stockbroker, and that the first person in their chain should be somebody they knew on a first-name basis. Milgram also advised them to choose someone they believed, presumably based on the target's location and occupation, could be socially closer to the target than they were themselves. Subsequent recipients in the chain were asked to forward the same instructions. Many of the Omaha recipients undoubtedly tossed Milgram's booklet in the trash, so it's remarkable that the Boston target received 18 of the 96 packages. The average number of links in the 18 chains was 5.9. But the now familiar expression 6 degrees of separation would not gain broad currency until many years later, when John Guare's play by that name premiered on Broadway in 1990. The concept became a meme in full when 4 Albright College students introduced 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon in 1994, a game designed to measure the professional proximity of an actor, living or dead, to the American film star Kevin Bacon. An actor has a Bacon number of 1, for example, if he or she appeared in the same film with Bacon. Someone who appeared in a film with another actor who appeared in a film with Bacon has a Bacon number of 2, and so on. The average Bacon number is 2.95 among actors who have one. In that group, even the actor most distant from Bacon, William Rufus Shafter, has a Bacon number of only 7. Shafter, a Union Army officer during the Civil War, appeared in 2 films in 1898. For academics who study social connectedness, the 6 degrees concept gained little traction until 1998. That's when the sociologist Duncan Watts and the mathematician Steve Straga published their landmark paper, Collective Dynamics of Small World Networks in Nature. In the years since then, this paper has provided the mathematical foundation for the analytical tools that social scientists have been using with such remarkable success to study how ideas and behaviors spread through populations like infectious diseases. It has already been cited by other scholars more than 38,000 times and is one of the few papers ever published to be among the most widely cited works in multiple disciplines. In his 1976 book, The Selfish Gene, the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins coined the term meme, which Webster now defines as an idea, behavior, style, or usage that spreads from person to person within a culture. The meme is to cultural transmission, Dawkins argued, as the gene is to biological transmission. One of Charles Darwin's central insights was that natural selection favors genetic variations that enhance the individual organism's ability to survive and reproduce. Much of the time, the same variations also benefit larger groups, but often not. For example, an inclination to cheat when no one's looking might benefit individuals, but widespread cheating almost always makes matters worse for groups. It is the same with memes. The memes that propagate most successfully are often ones that benefit both individuals and groups. But here too, not always. As the legal scholar Jeffrey Stake has argued, ideas should not be treated as inert products, but as living things that sometimes exert some influence over their environment. Some of the ideas are more adept at surviving than others, and the ones that survive will not necessarily be good for humans. It is often hard to evaluate whether a specific behavior even qualifies as a meme, and if so, whether its consequences on balance are positive or negative. Yet sometimes the evidence is clear. We know, for example, that the strongest predictor of whether people will take up smoking is the proportion of their close friends who smoke. Smoking is thus clearly a meme. The negative health consequences of smoking are also conclusively documented, and most smokers themselves express regret over having started. By definition, then, smoking unambiguously qualifies as a socially destructive meme. On the other side of the ledger, we have compelling evidence that the adoption of photovoltaic solar panels is both socially contagious and almost uniformly positive in terms of environmental consequences. Accordingly, few would object to calling the practice a socially beneficial meme. Adam Smith, widely considered the father of economics, is often cited in defense of the claim that competitive markets produce the greatest good for the greatest number. The book is Under the Influence by Robert H. Frank.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So David Perry over at Medium.com put together a list of 38 reasons to investigate the Trump administration. Everything from the Russian influence over the 2016 election to the Trump family's collusion with Russia to Ivanka Trump's trademarks to federal spending at Trump properties to the civilians killed by Trump's drone strikes to the Trump administration's role in turning the United States into the global epicenter for the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we are. Yes, it's grim. Their decision to sideline the CDC, politicizing mask wearing just to try to get himself reelected, the number of people who died because the White House kept PPE from blue states, from Democratic-led states, the contents of the Trump documents that Trump refused to release to the House Judiciary Committee and other committees, all the people who wouldn't speak, at all, ignoring subpoenas, violations of the Hatch Act, the deportation of COVID-positive immigrant families, illegal altering of records. Anyhow, there's a whole list. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And my cat, Ketty, has come. We named Ketty after the movie. I don't know if you ever saw it. It was in the art theaters for a while. We saw it in Washington, D.C., about a bunch of cats in Turkey, as I recall, Istanbul. And K-E-D-I was the... So anyhow, Ketty just jumped up on my desk here, and so you may hear from him. Apologies in advance. One last point I wanted to make about the Chauvin trial this morning, because Debbie's not going to be able to join us today with an update, is that this physician, this pulmonary expert, this lung and breathing expert, just laid out a devastating case about what happened to what happened to George Floyd when Derek Chauvin put his knee on his neck, and how it constricted his airways, and that produced a predictable rise in carbon dioxide, and they actually measured the exact level of carbon dioxide in his blood when he got to the hospital that this physician predicted would have happened from having a cop put his knee on your neck for 9 minutes. And it just gutted the defense. It was just astonishing. So, we'll see where the trial goes from here. But if you have a chance to catch that in online or wherever you can see it, it's really worth the effort. Russell in Carnation, Washington. Hey, Russell, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Thom Hartmann, what a pleasure and an honor to speak with you today. Say, I have a proof-positive case of what we're talking about with a high top marginal tax rate resulting in corporate reinvestment, to wit, the Boeing 707. Got to understand that by the mid-50s, the Boeing company had not made a commercial airliner in about 15, 20 years. They were a defense contractor. World War II had been very good to them. The Cold War was even better to them. And they had all this money that was going to get retaxed by Uncle Sugar, and so they decided to use their expertise in multi-engine jet aircraft to make a commercial jetliner, which succeeded very greatly. All of these facts I'm giving you now came from a 2010 Seattle Times article on the 100th anniversary of the Boeing Company, so they're pretty easy to verify. But this is a proof.
So they explicitly did it to avoid paying taxes on the profits that they were making as a military contractor?
They absolutely did.
Wow. Wow. Russell,
Yes.
if you can send me a link to that article, I
sure.
would love to see that. You can tweet it to me. Is probably the easiest way
I
to
don't
get something
tweet,
to
but
me
I'd be happy to
instantly.
email you.
Okay, that's cool. My email address is over on our website. Russell, that's an amazing story. It's an absolutely amazing story. Thank you so much for that. I truly appreciate it. Richard in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Richard, it says here you disagree with me. What's up?
Can you ask me about 5 questions one at a time and let me show you how prejudiced and liars what you are?
Okay.
One at a time.
You want to ask me questions, you're saying?
What he does, the Republicans. Then, you blame all the Republicans for every damn thing just because you don't like one man for one damn thing.
Well, that's not true.
One question at a time. What don't you like about what Trump done or did?
I don't like Trump promoting race.
You're two-faced and you're a liar. Okay?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Do you want me to answer your question, Richard, or do you just want to call me names?
Yeah, one time. Go ahead, one question.
Okay. All right. What I don't like about Donald Trump is that he's a racist. I don't like the fact that he rapes women. I think he's a lousy example for our children. I don't like the fact that he's a fascist, that he encourages cops to beat people up. I don't like the fact... One at a time? No, Richard, I'm sorry. I'm not going to play the game with your rules. Carrie in Arlington Heights, Illinois. Hey, Carrie, what's on your mind today?
I have a theory I want to run by you here. It's a half-baked theory that true conservatism, limited government and all that, has failed, and that 90% of the Republicans have rejected conservatism or never actually bought into it. They're more, I would consider them fascists than conservatives. And this occurs to me to be, similar to the collapse of the Soviet ideology that George Kennan had predicted based on the weight of its own ideological inconsistencies. And I was wondering what you thought of that.
I think it's a good analogy, Kerry, and I would extend it a little bit. My understanding of conservatism, what I learned back in the 60s and 70s, watching William F. Buckley, listening to my dad, and a lot of these people who considered themselves conservatives, was that conservatism was not opposed to, moving forward in society, but wanted to do so slowly and carefully and, vet every decision so as not to be disruptive to society. The conclusion that I have come to in my old age here, principally in the last couple of years, is that was just all camouflage for we don't want to, for white people and a white power structure essentially saying that it doesn't want to integrate black people, brown people, basically other people of other races or people who are not gender conforming into society. That it really had very little to do with progress moving forward, and that the subsidiary argument to that, which I had always thought was the primal argument, in my book Screwed, I talk about, their main argument was basically we just want the rich to get richer and to hell with the middle class. But I think that's really subordinate to the white supremacy that is at the core of conservatism and has always been. I mean, William F. Buckley came out and said it in the 1950s that I think it was 1956. That the white race was the most advanced race, his phrase, and therefore should be allowed to control both politics and culture in the United States. That ideology, in my opinion, is still the primary animating ideology of the GOP and of the conservative movement. And the secondary one, which is nearly as toxic, is that wealth should be held by those who, quote, deserve it, which of course are, wealthy white people, and should be denied to those who don't deserve it, which would be the working class and the poor. And I think that all of this has been very badly discredited, and that increasingly Americans are seeing what is so obvious to me here, that these are both the case. What say you?
Well, I'm kind of fixated on this idea that conservatism has failed. So are you saying...
Well, my point is that it's failed because its core assumption, I mean, just like slavery failed, its core assumption is a racist assumption. And its secondary assumption that, which is a Calvinist assumption, that God has ordained some people as good people and they should have all the wealth, and God has ordained the rest of us as bad people who shouldn't have all the wealth. Both of these have been just completely discredited, or largely discredited. I'm guessing, our caller from Oklahoma would disagree with me, but I think the number of people in America who do disagree with those premises are diminishing rapidly.
But it also doesn't work. I mean, look at how it worked with
my point
dealing with the COVID virus. Conservatism. Obviously, that failed miserably because of its own internal, whether it's Trump or conservatives, its own internal.
Yeah, it was. We'll just let the free market deal with this. Yeah. Right. Yeah, it was. We're just going to let the free market deal with it, and the free market didn't deal with it. I mean, it's the so-called free market. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Carrie. I got to move along, but thank you for the call, Marta in Big Bear Lake, California. Hey, Marta, what's up?
Well, my understanding is that FDR and LBJ didn't take no for an answer, and they really pressured the other elected officials in Congress to do the right thing for
That's
the
true.
New Deal, for civil rights, Social Security.
Although keep in mind,
Medicare.
Marta, FDR had almost 3/4 of the House and Senate. LBJ had in the neighborhood of 2/3. Joe Biden has a 50-50 Senate and is close to a 50-50 House. So he does not have the elbow room to exercise the kind of political force on people that LBJ and FDR could do, on people within his own party. I mean, the last thing that we want to have happen is for Manchin to feel, for example, or Sinema to feel so pressed by us or by Biden or by anybody else that they say, oh, to hell with it, I'll just join the Republican Party.
Well, I understand where you're coming from. Now, I also would say that and ask you, well, for one thing, I really like how you have educated me about taxes being really investments in the nation and making the nation better. And so I expect Manchin to educate the voters just as Bernie Sanders has done.
Yeah. Well, hopefully he'll provide some justification or rationale beyond just saying, I ain't going to do it. Marta, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
45 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Back with your calls in just a moment. And welcome back, Jonathan in Portland. Hey, Jonathan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. As far as there's so many things I want to talk about. I think if we really want to understand how the world works, I want to understand taxes. If we want to understand politics, if we want to understand slavery, banking, we have to look at the tobacco industry. And I've been looking at a book written by a Yale historian that wrote about the Tidewater tobacco growers and how all of the...
Oh. Whoa. He disappeared. He disappeared quickly. I don't know what happened. Sometimes people touch their phone in ways that hang up their phone unintentionally. So anyhow, Donald in Berkeley. Hey, Donald, what's on your mind? Berkeley, California. Donald, you are on the air. I hope we are not having phone problems. Donald is on line 5, Joyce, if you want to check that out. Larry in Port Angeles, Washington. Larry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Tom. Can you hear me?
Great. I do, yeah. Okay, so it was just a coincidence. What's up?
I'm calling you about tax. Why don't we put big, huge tax on ammunition? Ammunition is not covered under the Second Amendment. That was muskets back then. What if we put a 90% tax on ammunition and ban ammunition that can be used for civilian use, that can be used in automatic weapons? You know, like the 223 and things like that.
I have heard people, people have proposed that over many years on this program and in other venues, and I can't knock it down as a weak argument. I think that probably a 90% tax would not be that consequential. You'd have a box of bullets going from $30 to $60, which is not going to deter people who want to kill people. But maybe a 900% or 1,000% tax on it. Or make a like there used to be a deposit on soda pop bottles. Make there be a deposit on the brass, and they have to bring the brass back. Big deposit on the brass. Yeah, I just don't think that, I get everything you're saying, and it would make life more difficult for people, particularly for people who do target practice, which is unfortunate, because I'm one of those people, who like to shoot for target practice. I do it with my brother, who owns several guns back in Michigan. But I don't think it's going to stop mass killers.
I don't think,
but I don't think any. Well, I get that, but you're just making life more difficult for people like that, and I just can't imagine where somebody has decided they're going to kill their family and themselves, as happened day before yesterday, or they're going to kill other people, as happened a couple days ago. That they're going to go, gee, this is going to cost me an extra $300. I don't think I'll do it. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to make ammunition hard to get, what you would have to do is regulate it in a way that basically you have to get permission to buy ammunition. You can have all the guns you want, but you've got to run a background check to buy ammunition, and every ammunition sale is cataloged and all that kind of stuff. And I think that would get so granular that it would become basically unworkable very quickly. Larry, thanks for the call, though. Hey, keep thinking. You got it. You're onto something here. We'll be back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, let's take a quick digression into science here for a couple of minutes. Gracy Olmstead. Gracy Olmstead is on the line with us, New York Times author, journalist, contributor to the book Uprooted, Recovering the Legacy of the Places We've Left Behind. And Gracy Olmstead, GracyOlmstead, is Gracy's Twitter handle. Gracy, welcome to the program. Can our food systems be fixed?
Well, I definitely think so. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on the show.
Thank you. So how do we do it? First of all, what's wrong with our food systems? And then, what do we need to do to fix that?
Well, one thing that we're seeing in the United States is that our food system has become incredibly efficient, which is a good thing. But that means that there's a lot of bottlenecks, a lot of monopolies, and other issues that make it really hard to get food from the farm to the consumer. And so even as we've built a very efficient food system, we've built one that is incredibly brittle, and that oftentimes means that farmers at the local level don't have a lot of diversity on their farms. They don't have a lot of resilience built into their farming models. And it's very hard for them to actually interact with the people who are buying their product. And so I argue that I think we need to do a better job of bringing back local and regional agribusinesses, kind of trying to fight some of these monopolies we see springing up around seed companies, slaughterhouses, and other food processors, and really encouraging farmers to grow a more diverse array of crops so that they're really strengthening the health of their soil as well.
So how do we do that in a system that has been largely monopolized by giant seed and pesticide and herbicide, Monsanto type companies? That the wholesale distribution of food is monopolized by a handful of companies, Cargill, ADM, et cetera. That the processing and sale of food products is now dominated by fewer than a dozen companies, control most of the products in your average supermarket. How do we do that?
Well, I definitely think that we're going to need to take a multi-pronged approach. There's definitely some national policy solutions that we need to start considering. Senator Cory Booker has actually aimed to take on some of these harmful agricultural monopolies through some bills that are aimed at antitrust legislation. And then the Justice Department and the Federal Trade Commission could also play a role by directing antitrust officers to break up the most harmful agribusiness mergers. The FTC specifically could establish fair competition rules that could also make a difference. But as Philip Howard and others have noted, we have so much monopolization that unless you see some of those moves start to spring up, it would be very difficult for competition, real healthy competition, to re-enter the marketplace.
Yeah, so it seems like a great place to start. Gracy Olmstead, the New York Times author, Uprooted, Recovering the Legacy of the Places We've Left Behind, journalist and contributor. Twitter handle is Gracy Olmstead. Gracy, thanks a lot. It's good food for thought, and I really appreciate you dropping by and sharing your perspective with us.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Good speaking with you. Continuing our conversations here, Donald in Berkeley. Hey, Donald, what's on your mind today?
Donald from the movie Heist, Who Stole the American Dream. And
okay.
Remember that one, since you were talking about the Powell memo?
I do.
Yes, and thank you so much for your help on the film. So connecting the dots.
It was my pleasure to narrate it.
Thank you, Tom. Connecting the dots about what you were talking about in terms of corporate America and the GOP and racism, we came out with another film, which in a sense was a sequel to Heist, called The Long Shadow, which is a long look at the history of slavery and white supremacy in the United States and how the South has been controlling the politics of this country ever since, right up till now.
I haven't seen that, Donald. Okay, go ahead and make your point.
Yeah, people can go to thelongshadowfilm.com. That's the website, thelongshadowfilm.com. You can find us on Facebook as well. And it's really an incredibly powerful film. In some ways, even stronger than Heist, because it really gets to the core issue of this country from its inception. And the other point I wanted to make was about Trump and the pandemic and the doctors who were surrounding him. It's my contention as a retired physician that Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx should have resigned their positions in April of last year, once Trump went berserk and deviated from what any normal physician would be doing. And they had a duty to tell the American people the truth. And they were just standing up there on the platform, enabling him. And that allowed 550,000 Americans to die. So from my point of view, when we take the Hippocratic Oath of do no harm, you have a duty to your patients, if you're a public health physician, to inform the public about what is the truth. They did not do that.
I think Fauci did a pretty good job of being consistent in his messaging.
I think he was only
to the point that Trump was trashing him.
Yeah, well, the way you do it is you resign. You say, this man is a lunatic. This man is going to kill hundreds of thousands of Americans. And I can't stand here and allow that to happen. And the same is true.
I get it. That, Deborah Birx kept trying to get along to go along, and that I think that has really badly tarnished her reputation,
to say the least.
Yeah. So, but I get your perspective, Donald. On the other hand, well, I'm more charitable toward Fauci. I am.
I understand.
Skeptical of Birx, but
I'm a physician.
Back to the Long Shadow.
We charitable.
Yeah, there you go. We have just 30 seconds, Donald. How do I watch the Long Shadow? Is it available on any of the streaming services?
Yes, it is. It's on all the streaming platforms, and people can watch it through their public library at Canopy, KANOPY.com, which is the streaming service for all the public libraries in the United States.
Oh, that's
you can watch
great.
it
And the
free
movie,
through Canopy.
And the movie that I narrated is there as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Both films are there. They're both doing well. They did very well during the pandemic.
Hello. Yeah, okay. Great. Donald, thank you so much. I've got to do something about a cat here. Thanks, Donald.
Okay.
Great talking with you. We'll be back in the next hour. The next hour, we've got the whole hour open and, a few little bits of news of the day, but mostly what's on your mind here relative to these topics. We've got a lot to cover. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll & Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Alan J. Lichtman, and it's titled Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. This from the introduction, titled The Book That Must Be Written. On April 28, 1996, 28-year-old Martin Bryant stopped at an inn near his home of Newtown in Tasmania, Australia, and shot to death its two owners. He then drove to the former penal colony and tourist attraction of Port Arthur, where he lunched at a cafe. After eating, Bryant pulled from his sports bag a semi-automatic rifle with a 30-round magazine that he had legally purchased through a newspaper ad. With no provocation, he began firing at patrons in the cafe and its gift shop. Before the police stopped his shooting spree, Bryant had murdered 35 and wounded 18 others. His motive remains unknown. There were people everywhere, bodies, said witness Lynn Beavis. I thought at the time, being a nurse, I've seen dead people, I've seen blood, I've seen things like this, but what I saw in there, nobody but perhaps a soldier would know what that was like. The leadership of a shocked nation responded to the Port Arthur massacre, not with thoughts and prayers, but with decisive action. The country's conservative-led government rebuffed their gun lobby and its American ally, the NRA, to adopt comprehensive national gun controls. In a 2015 broadside labeled Australia, There Will Be Blood, the NRA charged that those regulations, which Australia significantly tightened as of 2002, have, quote, robbed Australians of their right to self-defense and empowered criminals. If the NRA was right, America, with its lax control over firearms for alleged self-defense, should be one of the world's safest countries, certainly far safer than Australia, where criminals presumably evade gun controls to prey on defenseless, law-abiding citizens. Yet in the latest reporting year, gun homicides claimed 14,542 American lives, compared to 27 in Australia. And all homicides took 19,510 American lives, compared to 222 in Australia. Since the NRA issued its warning, firearm homicides have declined in Australia, while soaring by 3,534 in the U.S. An American is now over 30 times more likely per capita than an Australian to be murdered by a gun, and 7 times more likely to be murdered by any means. If we had rates comparable today to Australia's, some 14,000 American lives would have been saved from firearm homicides in 2017 alone. By the gun lobby's twisted logic, Japan, which has one of the world's strictest gun control laws, should be drenched in innocent blood. Yet out of a population of 127 million, shooters in Japan murdered only 3 persons and injured only 5 in firearm assaults throughout 2017. Australia and Japan are not outliers. As compared to residents of our closest peer democracies in the G7 group of nations plus Australia, an American in 2017 was over 20 times more likely to die from a gun homicide. The gun lobby would have you forget that gun deaths are not limited to murders. In 2017, 23,854 Americans died from gun suicides, 64% more than were killed in firearm homicides. As compared to the peer nations, the 2017 per capita rate of firearm suicides in the United States was 7 times higher, while the rate of suicides by other means was 40% lower. These other democracies all have strict firearm regulations. None has a constitutional right to keep or bear arms, a distinction the United States shares worldwide only with Guatemala, whose gun murder rate is the 3rd highest of some 195 nations worldwide. Why has America lagged behind the democratic world in protecting its citizens from needless death and injury? The culprit is not spending by the NRA on campaigns and lobbying, which other pressure groups exceeded. The real problem is that which gun control advocates fear to name, the Second Amendment. Led by the NRA, the gun lobby exploits a historically defective, perverse reinvention of this amendment to inspire their grassroots supporters, sell guns, and provide constitutional cover for their opposition to making us safer by regulating firearms. The competing movement for gun control has floundered in response to the gun lobby's triumphant marketing of the Second Amendment. Gun control advocates have righteous zeal and noble motives, but lack a winning strategy. Instead of forthrightly refuting the lobby's bogus claims, the gun control movement has instead fallen into the trap of lamely insisting, "Oh, we support the Second Amendment, but we also support responsible gun control." With such a self-defeating strategy, the movement can never win. It plays on the gun lobby's home turf and fails to rally the American majority that favors stricter firearms regulations. It provokes only scorn from a gun lobby that dismisses yes but assurances as rank hypocrisy, and it ignores the clear history and the true meaning of the Second Amendment itself. The movement for gun control must strike hard with a new strategy. Repeal of the Second Amendment is not only right, but realistic. It would break open the political logjam and open a path for the comprehensive national gun control and safety measures that have eluded the American people for so long. None of these measures would confiscate firearms or stop Americans from using guns for hunting, sport shooting, antique collecting, or legitimate self-defense. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. These form the Second Amendment. The book Repeal the Second Amendment by Alan J. Lichtman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, it's the day or the week of the flip, apparently. Weisselberg's, the CFO, the chief financial officer of the Trump organization for years, back from before Donald was running it, back when his dad Fred was running it, this guy was with the family. His daughter-in-law, now estranged from her husband or divorced from her husband, she has given 7 boxes of of documents to investigators in the Manhattan DA office and the New York State Attorney General's office, and she says she has several more in her possession, and she has hired a high-powered lawyer. So that's happening. And the guy that apparently at least according to some media reports, the guy that was procuring 17-year-olds for Matt Gaetz, who's, this is this Joel Greenberg guy, this weird tax collector down in Florida. He has been offered a lighter sentence in exchange for evidence that would incriminate Gaetz, or at least to suggest that. There was a hearing this morning in Orlando that suggests that he's going to be plea bargaining. And if he is, that may be very bad news for Congressman Gaetz. So, there's that. I'm kind of John Donne about all of this. Any man's death diminishes me. I just, it's a tragedy that people get into these things, that people, that following Trump has been, as I said to the caller who was like, oh, you liberals, you just hate Trump. And I'm like, no, I mean, he promoted some very bad standards for America. Raping women and making, advocating fascism, telling police to rough people up, saying that his followers who engage in violence, he'll pay for their legal bills, crowing about the execution, essentially, by police of the fellow here in Portland who shot the Proud Boy. All of these things, I mean, it's just, it all adds up to just an American tragedy in many ways. There was an interesting piece over, I saw the post on DU first, and it sent me to the blog post by a commentator. He was talking about a lot of normal people who actually can feel empathy, are experiencing like fatigue from dealing with sociopaths, from dealing with a sociopathic president, Donald Trump, from dealing with Trump's sociopathic buddies, like the leaders of Saudi Arabia and Russia and China and a few other countries, and dealing with sociopaths in our Congress, and dealing with sociopaths in our streets. The bullies, the gun nuts. It's just like there's just like this general psychic malaise, this deep wounding to the psyche of America that has happened as a consequence of the Trump presidency. And then, of course, we got locked down in the last year of it, and we're now just beginning to emerge from that. And yet even that is filled with danger because of the way that Trump handled the pandemic and his followers and not just Trump. I mean, you had, Kristi Noem in South Dakota, the governor up there, inviting, 500,000 bikers to her state. That accounted for hundreds of thousands of cases of COVID around the country and thousands of deaths, presumably. You had Greg Abbott doing the same thing down in Texas, not inviting bikers, but basically saying, be happy. You don't need no stinking masks. You have the governor, Ron DeSantis, down in Florida, same deal. And apparently covering up COVID deaths in that state. It certainly looks like it in any case. And I think that Americans are just like fried. We're cooked. We're done. So I don't know. I just tossed that on the table for your consideration. I don't have a therefore. Stephanie in Kankakee, Illinois. Hey, Stephanie, what's on your mind today?
Well, we down here in Pembroke Township have the largest black, concentration of organic farmers in the state. The governor has summoned, yes. We have probably around 150. Some are larger than others. We've been selling our food directly to our buyers, cutting out the middleman. Even though Big Ag farmers own 26% of our town, we're fighting to keep our town from Big Ag taking over, chopping down our trees, clear-cutting our ecosystem. But we go straight to, like, Northwestern wants to buy our blueberries. We go straight to Northwestern. Cook County wants to buy our vegetables. We're going straight to Cook County. We go straight to the food pantries to give our fresh vegetables for the homeless. We go straight, so we cut out the middleman. We don't even play with them. So, and with this $1 billion coming to black farmers, we're utilizing that to start more people farming down here. So the only way to deal with these monopolies is to not need them. When, when I was growing up, in Chicago, the vegetable man came from Pembroke. And he ran out to his vegetable cart, and all the women would come out, and I was in the 60s when a lot of mothers didn't work, and get their fresh vegetables and watermelons and things and other melons. So if we want to do this and stop these monopolies, we've got to not need them. We've got to start getting small farms back in place where a farmer does not take food no more than 60 to 100 miles away from his farm. That means he could get it there without having to pay a trucking company. And then the trucking company got to pay the warehouse. And then the warehouse got to pay. You know, it's just too much to get food to people. When we can do what we did back in the 40s and 30s and 50s and had small farmers feed people within 100 miles of them or less.
How have you been... I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
How have you been able to successfully maintain small ag and organic ag in the face of all the pressure from the big companies to basically conform to factory farming models?
Well, like I said, our problem is we have big ag farmers who have taken over our community. We ignore them. So far, they haven't come after us. But if they come after us, then we are ready to fight. I have a right to sell my greens. So we actually didn't get to pick over 1,000 pounds of greens because the weather caught us. And we didn't have pickers. So what we do is, if I want to sell to you, Tom, they can try to interfere with that, but that's between me and you.
Yeah.
So what we do is, and the governor is on the side now to promote more black farmers to get back into agriculture. And we have people down here with 100 acres. If you don't want to farm it, we're trying to find people who you can rent it to who will turn it back to a farm.
Yeah.
So we got another program that's paying people's taxes who are losing their land for taxes. So we got a program to pay the taxes for 6 years, but they got to grow something on it.
That's great.
So we're
Stephanie,
working on the ground root.
Yeah, forgive my interruption. We just have about 50 seconds left. Louise and I, for years, have subscribed to a local service here in Portland where organic growers, they throw together a box of food every week and deliver it to our house. And it costs us about $40-50 a week. Is that the sort of thing that works that supports organic farmers also? I'm assuming it does.
Yes, it is the one thing that supports organic farmers, because these people cannot get a hold of your list of people. They can't stop you, and you can ship to who you want. We got to cut that middleman out. The warehouse, the big ag farmers, Monsanto, people like that. Only way we can do it is to not need them.
Yeah. And that means building that relationship with the individual consumers, whether it's a restaurant that wants to buy your product or a school that wants it or an individual home. Stephanie, thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for the education. It's great talking with you, and thanks for listening to WCPT. I appreciate it. We'll be back. It's 15 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, picking up your phone calls. A lot on the table here, from taxes to the Chauvin trial to guns to organic agriculture. We can discuss it all. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
To also, this question of malaise, I hate to use that word because it was used against Jimmy Carter, but, the damage done to us by Trump. And welcome back. 15 minutes past the hour. And Clay in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Clay, thank you for holding on as long as you did. I'm sorry it ended up that way. What's up?
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I was just calling because I wanted to mention about and the malaise you said about what's been done to us by Donald Trump. I guess kind of ties in with this, but it seems to me that people have just gotten so to the point where they're just not thinking about things. All they do is they look for points that support their position and don't reason out. Like the guy that you had on at the beginning of the show, he mentioned that that the infrastructure will improve if you lower the corporate tax rate. Now, I don't know where he gets that I don't know how you reason that to be the case, but
well, I don't see how that's consistent with the last 40 years of history.
yeah, I know that's what I was. Yeah, I mean the infrastructure's been in decline for 40 years almost. So,
right.
Yeah, I mean I don't, and the gun thing, about how you're going to defend yourself against the United States Army with some guns. It's just they don't. How can you? Is it wrong to think that they're just not thinking at all reasonably about this stuff?
Well, who's the they you're talking about, Clay?
The conservatives, the right wing, the libertarians that that promote these ideas.
Yeah.
That
I think there's a lot of
get their idea done. They don't want to actually reason if it's going to be a good thing or not.
I think it's actually more insidious than that. I think that you have industries and ideologically driven billionaires who are both throwing an enormous amount of money into the system. It's kind of like blood in the water, or chum in the water to draw. Yeah, and there are people out there who say, yeah, cross my palm with a couple $100,000 a year, and I'll say what you want me to say, or a couple million a year in some cases. And so you end up with everything from commentators to so-called experts to people running websites and cranking out information.
My thing is how can people not see that what they are defending is unreasonable and makes no sense? That's the part.
I think they know that. I mean,
they may.
On Politico, a couple of years ago, they outed the fact that the Heritage Foundation was giving $1 million a year to Sean Hannity and $2 million a year to Rush Limbaugh. Somebody's handing you $1 million a year, you're probably not going to turn around and bite them.
I don't mean the commentators. I mean the people that are hearing them, that they're receiving the message, and they say,
I think for the average American, they're just busy. They're overwhelmed. They're trying to support their families. They're they're not. Most people are not heavy news consumers. They may watch sports on the weekend and they watch entertainment on TV and they catch the news as needed. But they're not. Most people are not heavy news consumers, and so they're not as well informed. Yeah, and Facebook has been, polluted, contaminated by this because they take paid advertising, and of course the paid advertisers are in many cases, the Trumps of the world. I mean, that's how Trump won the election in 2016, was largely with through Facebook. That was what Cambridge Analytica was all about.
It just baffles me how people can't see the flaws in these things. But.
Yeah. Well, there's a large segment of them, I think, that are just buying into the racist part of the agenda, and then the rest of them, I think, are just confused. Clay, thank you for the call, and it's always nice to hear from Mississippi. We'll be back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Welcome back, 20 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Alejandro in Miami, Florida, you are on the air.
Hello, Tom. How are you doing?
I'm great. What's up?
No, I just want to talk about the whole, gun control thing with Joe Biden's plans and stuff. And I think, obviously, I wanted to give my legal perspective on this and why, you can't put a lot of reasonable restrictions on the Second Amendment. I'm just going to give a little brief overview before I go to my main point about why.
Sure. Are you an attorney?
Yes, I'm an attorney. I'm a Florida bar attorney.
Great.
Yes. Yeah. So the Second Amendment is about the right to keep and bear arms. And the Supreme Court ratified the decision in D.C. versus Heller, saying that for the first time, that individuals have a right to guns for self-defense at home. And, of course, that's very important to keep in mind because for self-defense weapons are usually just handguns. You don't have a right to have a machine gun necessarily or an AK-47 or bazooka for self-defense. It's more about what was the reasonable self-defense for back then. Like back then, maybe you needed a musket or rifle for reasonable self-defense. So a handgun or a rifle could be, similar, but not a military-grade weapon. I think that's not what the founding fathers were thinking about when they were thinking about this amendment, right? And then even in the dicta, it says that the right is not unlimited. It does not preclude the existence of certain longstanding prohibitions, such as those forbidding the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill or restrictions on the carrying of dangerous and unusual weapons. And what's interesting about that was that Scalia, I think in that opinion, he said that, well, if you could carry in your arm any firearm, it should be legal to carry. I think he said something around that line, which I think in that case, you could carry a shoulder-powered missile, RPG, because, as long as you can carry it, you have a right to use it, which I think is obviously ridiculous. We have to put reasonable restrictions on gun ownership. And I would even argue the whole point of the well-regulated militia is implying that the government has a right to regulate firearms. That is not a free-for-all. So, that's just very important to keep in mind that, when people complain about the Second Amendment, or I would call these amosexuals, they say, oh, no, don't take away my guns. It's about, restricting guns to the people who should have guns, right? So that, crazy people or criminals don't have it. I mean, that's all it is, these restrictions, just closing the gun show loophole, closing the private sale loopholes, just making it so more legitimate citizens get these guns. That's how I look at it.
I agree with you. The two things I'd add to your analysis, and the point, your number one point, that Heller completely reinvented our understanding of the Second Amendment, I think is the key to the whole thing. When you go back and read like the letters between the people who were involved in developing what ultimately became the Second Amendment, and also when you read the dialogues at the various ratifying conventions, the most significant was the Virginia ratifying convention, what you find is that there were two animating dialogues, discussions, debates going on in that era between 1787 and 1791 when the amendments were ratified, or 93, whichever year it was. And the first one was a debate over whether America should have a standing army. That was the largest debate. That occupied like 80% of the space. That debate happened at the Constitutional Convention. That debate happened at every single one of the ratifying conventions. I lay out all the quotes from these in my book on, the hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. And you had one faction, which were for a while referred to as the Anti-Federalists, or it got all mixed up actually by that point, so I shouldn't even use those labels. But you had one faction that was led basically by Jefferson that was saying America should not have a standing army if we're at peace, period. That the history of the world shows us that one of the most common things that destroys governments from within is a military coup. And we do not want to have a professional military in this country ever, because it will represent the greatest threat to our form of government. And therefore, what we should do is we should have each state have a militia, a volunteer militia. They can be paid, but basically a volunteer militia. And that militia will be well regulated. They're going to be competent. They're going to be trained. And if the country is invaded, then the federal government can call up the militias. And there's actually language to that effect in Article 1 of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And so that was the principal argument. And in fact, Jefferson, right up through his presidency, 1801 to 1809, he cut the number of, when he came into office, there were 300,000 men in the American Army, or the Army and the Navy. He cut that down to 3,000 people by the time he left office. Wow. He was trying to destroy the standing army because he thought it was a threat to the government. Now, the War of 1812 changed our thinking on that. That was one of the reasons that the British could come down and the Canadians could come down and all the way into Washington, D.C. and burn down the White House, was because there wasn't any army left anymore. It didn't work out that well. So that whole debate ended in 1815, at the end of the War of 1812. And that went away completely. The second debate that was had in the ratifying conventions, principally the Virginia ratifying convention, was when Patrick Henry, who was the largest slaveholder in the state of Virginia, got up and pointed out, and I've got, all the quotes are in my book, you can easily read them, and find links to the original sources. Patrick Henry got up and pointed out that there were 230 some odd thousand, what he referred to as black people in this state. And he said, if our militia, which in Virginia and South Carolina and Georgia was also the slave patrol. This was, everybody was required by law to be, all the white men were required, between 17 and 49 years old, were required by law 1 weekend a month to go out and, on horseback with weapons and look for runaway slaves and keep everybody terrorized. This was state terrorism. And he said, if our slave patrol is called up by anti-slavery people in Washington, D.C. If a president ever if we ever get an anti-slavery president, it will be the end of our slave patrol, which will be the end of our way of life. And that's why Madison changed the language in the Second Amendment from for a free country to for a free state. That's why it says state, was to recognize the Virginia, South Carolina, and Georgia slave patrols. And that was the only way they were able to get those things through. The Second Amendment through was by changing it that way. So, and all of that is completely ignored by Scalia in the Heller decision. And it's completely ignored, which is just amazing. Alejandro, thank you for the call and for the information and for giving me space for that rant. I'm sorry that we ran out of time. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, but next time you call. Thanks so much. We'll be back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the True People's Media, the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back.
For our book club today, we're reading from Thomas Frank's book, Rendezvous with Oblivion, Reports from a Sinking Society. This is chapter 1, titled Servile Disobedience. Social scientists have tried for more than a century to understand how class works. Psychological experiments on the subject, however, are a relatively novel thing, so I was surprised to discover a few years ago that psychologists had published a series of papers on the behavioral aspects of social status, and that their findings were almost uniformly unflattering towards society's winners. In one 2009 study in Psychological Science found that in conversations with strangers, high-status people tend to do more doodling and fidgeting, and also to use fewer engagement cues, looking at the other person, laughing, nodding their heads. A 2010 paper published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that lower-class individuals, in quote, turned out to be better performers on measures of such pro-social virtues as generosity, charity, and helpfulness. A third study found that those of higher status were noticeably worse at assessing the emotions of others or figuring out what facial expressions mean. All of which is to say the rich are different from you and me. They are more rude and less generous. They don't understand, they don't get what others are thinking, and apparently they don't really care. Perhaps this is obvious to you. After all, people don't design toxic debt obligations by calling out what they learned in Sunday school. Still, the research aroused media interest. The Christian Science Monitor's 2010 account of one study ended with this quotation from Michael Krauss, then the University of California, San Francisco, who is one of the researchers, quote, "Being empathic is one of the first steps to helping other people. One of the first things we're really interested in is what can make wealthy people, affluent people, the people with the capacity to give, what can make them empathic?" I think I see the urgency of Dr. Krauss's question. After all, we have spent the past several decades doing everything we could to transfer the wealth of the nation into the bank accounts of the affluent to send them victorious, happy, and glorious, long to reign over us. Oh, we've cut their taxes, gladly transferring much of the cost of keeping their property safe onto our own shoulders. We've furnished them with special megaphones so that their voices can be heard over the hubbub of the crowd. We've conferred upon them separate and better schools, their very own transportation system, and a full complement of private security guards. We've built an entire culture of courtiers and sycophants to make their every working hour an otherworldly delight. We let them construct a system of bonuses and executive compensation on the theory that it would be good for everyone if the people at the top got to take home much, much more than the rest of us. And when it turned out that the theory was wrong, that in the most famous cases, executives chased bonuses not to the shareholders' benefit, but at their expense, why, we promptly bailed them out. We allowed them to step into the Fed's discount window and fill their pockets. We generously transferred their reckless investments to our balance sheet, and we chastised them with little more than a polite request that they please not do it again. We've done everything we can to lift them up and exalt them as the new Leviathan. The least they can do in return, one feels, is to show a little empathy. Besides, look what we've done with the old Leviathan, the government. For decades, we've attacked it, redirected it, outsourced it, and filled it with incompetence and cronies. Yes, it still works well enough when we need to blow up some small country, But those branches of it designed to help our Americans of lower socioeconomic status, in quotes, as the scientists would put it, are now bare. We need the rich to be nice. We need them to stop doodling, paying and to pay attention and get generous. Now that the government has divested from the empathy business, we need the rich to discover brotherly love and fast. Come to think of it, wasn't that supposed to be the deal in the first place? The arrangement Andrew Carnegie brokered over a century ago when he made his big career move from Steel King to public library baron? The laissez-faire social contract would grant private business a free hand, but in exchange, those who piled up massive wealth were supposed to extend a magnanimous hand to the rest of us. As Carnegie wrote in his famous 1889 essay, The Gospel of Wealth, we don't need socialism to solve our problems. Philanthropy is the true antidote for the temporary inequality distribution of wealth and reconciliation of the rich and poor, quoting Carnegie. Going further, Carnegie argued that the duty of the man of wealth was, quote, to consider all surplus revenues which come to him simply as trust funds, which he's called upon to administer in the manner which, in his judgment, is best calculated to produce the most beneficial results for the community. The man of wealth thus becoming the mere trustee and agent for his poorer brethren, end quote. That same way of thinking led Carnegie to support the estate tax. Of all forms of taxation, this seems the wisest, he wrote. It was wise because it would, quote, induce the rich man to attend to the administration of wealth during his life. And if he didn't, then the tax would return most of his hoardings to the community from which it came, using Carnegie's words. Vestiges of the Carnegie attitude survive to this day. 2009 study of high net worth individuals by Barclays Wealth confirmed that American philanthropists tend to understand their giving in a context in which the state is either absent or irrelevant. And of course, there are plenty of nice plutocrats who don't fidget or doodle when talking to strangers and who have no problem endowing a ward or a wing in return for a commemorative plaque. The business headlines even occasionally tell of billionaires coming together under the leadership of Warren Buffett and Bill Gates to donate their fortunes to worthy causes. But the billionaires with the strongest sense of class solidarity have a very different plan for their disposable income, activating their lobbyists in Washington, building grassroots movements to march on their behalf, and using their media properties to run experiments on human credulity. Rendezvous with Oblivion is
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So back in the day, and I mean back in the 1780s, literally when the Constitutional Convention was happening in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, there was this debate about the quality of the vote, whether people who only landowners should be allowed to vote, stuff like that, and in order to ensure that well-informed people who really care about voting are the only ones voting. It didn't pass. It was rejected by the framers of the Constitutional Convention, this idea that only landowners should be allowed to vote. Never made it in the Constitution. But a variation on this is now being proposed in the Arizona legislature. And State Representative John Kavanaugh, who's the chair of the committee that's pushing this legislation, says the quality of the vote is important. We have to look at the quality of votes as well. I've got a new video all about this for the supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Ziggy in Oneonta, New York. Am I saying that right, Ziggy?
Yes, you got it right, Tom. It's Oneonta. I have to disagree with you on one point. And if I'm a small business and I purchase a vehicle, I do not get to expense it immediately out and reduce my taxes. I must capitalize the expense and then depreciate it over a period of years. So it does me very little good to buy the car.
Well, yes and no. I mean, you can take a chunk of it. You can, if you've got 5-year depreciation, you can take 20% of it. But that's why I said you'll see a lot of car leasing happening at those points. Although it's not that is not an immediate drain on your profits. So you're right. I should take cars out of the equation altogether. And arguably for big companies, that would be also true of large construction projects like building factories. Those would be depreciated over time. But there are substantial upfront costs associated with building a factory. You've got engineering, you've got architecture, you've got the acquisition of materials. You've got a lot of things that can be immediately expensed. It depends on how the company is doing their bookkeeping. But your points are well taken, Ziggy.
Tom, one quick point. If the so-called good guys with a gun are the ones who stormed the Capitol. You have a good day. Bye-bye.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Ziggy. I think that's, in fact, there was a Jeff Tiedrich quote this morning that was quoted over on DU that was just hysterical. This was the tweet for the day. He says, "First they came for the Second Amendment, and I didn't speak out. Because no one's coming for the Second Amendment, you whiny, paranoid, dip-doo-doo, grievance baby gun fetishist." Yeah, well said. Okay. David in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hey, David, what's on your mind today? David? Yeah, I think he stepped away from his phone. I'm going to put David on hold because he was on hold there for quite a while. And Joyce, if you want to check him out, he's on line 3. Make sure everything's okay. Karen in Winter Haven, Florida. Hey, Karen, what's on your mind?
Well, there's a couple of things we can discuss. One was impact investing, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but your audience may not be. And the other is I know quite a bit about Piney Point, the disaster down here, so either one or both.
Yeah. Well, tell us about Piney Point. My understanding is that you had a phosphate mining company that went belly up a while ago and left behind this mess. Is that in a nutshell what happened, or is it? I'm guessing it's probably far more complex than that.
Well, that's about 20 years ago. Mulberry Phosphate went bust and just walked away, shut off the pumps and walked away. Right. And what that pond is that's leaking is from actual processing, not from mining. It's the processing plants are where the rocks come and they process them with water, and that water is toxic once it has all the phosphogypsum and everything else in it. And some of it is radiated, and they have to separate those two types of waters. The radiated water ponds are behind this particular pond that's leaking right now. The problem with the pond that's leaking is it's full of super nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, which they're pouring into the bay right now, which we just had 10 years of successful cleanup.
Right, which will cause an algal bloom, right, which will kill all the fish?
Yeah, and probably travel around the coast if it gets into the channel. Mm-hmm. It's a definite super fun site, but the problem with it is the EPA took it over. They handed it over to the state DEP, which is the environmental state people. Somebody got the bright idea to they spent $170 million putting in the liner and everything that was in a phosphate land reclamation fund. They swiped that, and then somebody got the bright idea to sell it to this H&R Holdings, which is a hedge fund guy out of New York, and they're in bankruptcy and have been in and out of bankruptcy several times. And so they, weren't about to put any money into repairs and they shouldn't have been putting more material into that pond. That's your bottom line right there. With the rainfall we get in Florida, and somebody decided that that'd be a great place to pump the bilge out of the ships from the port of Tampa and put it in there. They put all this toxic waste in there, and now it can't hold it. But the problem, Tom, is that if you take too much pressure out of that pond, you may cause a cascade of the ponds behind, and that's where the radiated water is. But in Florida,
it's a really, really bad situation.
Yeah, I'm here in Polk County, and most of the phosphate mining took place in Lakeland and Mulberry, and you have what's called gypsum stacks. And if you're driving along Route 60 to Tampa Bay, you will go by these man-made mountains in Mulberry that have holding ponds on the top of them of this gypso, the radiated water from the processes, and these things fail all the time. They're just a huge bad idea. The guy you really want to get on here, and I've sent you a couple of Twitters about it, is Craig Pittman. He wrote for the Tampa Bay Times for years. He's a specialist, and he knows a lot about this.
Yeah, it's good stuff, and I should dig into it deeper. Karen, thank you very much for that. I appreciate the call and the information. Mike in Barney Lake, Washington. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hey, afternoon, Tom. Couple really quick thank yous. Since I've been listening for about an hour, the gentleman that called in about Boeing, if that article is what it is, I can't wait to see it on your Twitter feed, just like your
Me too.
ADHD. Yeah, I have to tell you, your ADHD, and for any listeners that missed you reading it on the bottom of the hour, that feed was amazing. I shared it with a half a dozen of my intellectual friends that I've come to know, love, trust, and respect, and it sparked an amazing conversation.
Good.
That leads me to, it's amazing. Leads me to the reason I called is my lady and I last week took a trip down to Portland to spend a day doing a photo journey of the beauty within the ugly. And my heart is so sinking for how things are down there. And the reason I'm calling is because if and when the infrastructure bill gets passed, how do you see something like that helping where Portland needs help? Because I'm old enough to remember in the 1970s, the joke in Seattle was last person to leave, turn the lights out.
Portland is, my sense of it is we've got a serious problem with homeless people, camping along the freeways and every place else, and that's
downtown.
That's
we
a social.
A lot of photos. Sorry, Joe.
No, feel free. But that's a big issue. And then we've got dueling protesters, the anarchists who just kind of want to tear everything down, and the right wingers who just want to install a fascist dictatorship, and they seem to enjoy going after each other on the streets. It's
and see we if I may, we looked at the federal building all fenced up, and it was sad, and the Washington building down there is just all boarded up. But the homeless, we talked to a few of the homeless, and they allowed us to take their photos because we're putting together a journey. One of the things with two of your last callers, I love that you had Grace on it in regards to our food supply, is some of us are looking at a project where we take old GSA warehouses that aren't used anymore, create a trust or create a grant or get a grant and create live, work, and play communities within a fenced-in area, because with legalization of cannabis, hydroponics and vertical gardening is what I see local food chains really going towards. So with that infrastructure,
although they can
see how something like that could be a benefit for cities like Portland.
Yeah, that can be somewhat energy intensive depending on how it's done, but I think that back in the 40s during World War II, my mother used to tell me these stories about victory gardens, that everybody was growing vegetables in their front yard or their backyard. Everybody had a garden, and it was encouraged by the federal government. And I would like to see us return to that. It's kind of, why do we have to grow so much grass in America? We could be growing food. And then it'd take the pressure off big ag, and we'd all be healthier. Mike, I got to run, but thank you for the call. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. It's the place where despair is not an option. And welcome back. Patty in Pompano Beach, Florida. Hey, Patty, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Along the lines of a little bit of that lady with the farm our neighborhood and the neighboring neighborhood has put up a mini food pantry, which is kind of like those lending libraries where you put books in and you can take books out. And a lot of the neighbors have gotten together, and we keep it stocked with, canned soups and meats and baby food and all kinds of dry goods like beans and rice and peanut butter and oatmeal and cereals and stuff. And we can put in fresh veggies. It's the people that host it are just homes. They have it out in front of their house, just like the lending libraries, and have even put in like a small mini fridge where you can put in some refrigerated goods, cheeses, or whatever. And anybody can come by and take what they need, and anybody can drop off. And we keep it pretty well stocked. When we go on that nextdoor.com neighborhood thing or .org, and we'll mention whether, like, hey, the pantry's empty, anybody want to come and drop stuff off? And I buy one, get ones at the store, or pick up an extra bag of carrots and potatoes, and just, whenever, once a week or something, I just go down there and stock it up, and sometimes it's full and sometimes it's empty.
Wow. Was this organized by an individual who just had a great idea? Was it based on a website? Was there a local political person or organization or the city or county involved in any way? How did this happen?
I think it was just the neighborhood association. We were talking about how can we help with the hungry in the neighborhood and food pantries. And instead of having to go someplace downtown, people can just walk or it's just a local thing in our neighborhood. And it's quite well utilized. One of them, actually both of them, are out in front of private people's homes. They just used a little part of their front of their swale there to set up this little lending library of food. So,
yeah, that is great. That is
something nice so that people don't have to drive across town and stand in line at a food pantry. They can just walk.
Is it principally designed to help people who live in your neighborhood? I mean, how do you deal with the people in the neighborhood who might be concerned about, it's kind of the NIMBY thing, about, oh my God, homeless people are going to come in our neighborhood or something like that?
I don't think that's really. We do have homeless people that could take advantage of it. We have some people that could possibly just go clean it out and then sell it, out of their home. But you're risking that. But if somebody's doing that, they need it more than we do. So.
Yeah, that's my sentiment. There was a piece posted a couple days ago, a sign from a Little Caesars franchise that they put on their trash can that said, "Dear person digging for food, if you're hungry enough that you're digging through our trash, please come into the restaurant. We'll give you a couple slices of pizza and a glass of water at no charge."
Yeah,
like,
I've even taped like $5 to the back of some mac and cheese and say, "Go buy meat."
Yeah.
And if they pick up the box, they'll get they'll get to have a little bit extra.
That's sweet. Patty, thank you for the call. Thanks for the information. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Ask a boomer what it was like going to college back in the 60s and 70s and whether they had to go into debt to do it. And odds are they'll tell you that they not only didn't have to go into debt, in fact, college was free in California until Ronald Reagan became governor. Not only did they not have to go into debt, but you could pretty much work your way through college just with a part-time job. That is very much no longer the case. Only 8% of millennials and Gen Xers have never had a student loan. This is a crushing burden on these two generations, and it's time to clean it up. And when Americans were asked What do you think? Should we just wipe the slate clean? Should we get rid of all this student debt? 60% of Americans said yes. And then, of course, the corollary to that would be, and then let's make college free, at least state colleges and community colleges. There's a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. You can check it out there. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here. Dale in Springfield, Missouri. Hey, Dale, what's on your mind?
Well, hello, Tom. Tom, you never have to apologize for a cat because you know they're going to do whatever they want to do.
Yeah, well, I had him locked out of the room that I'm using for a studio here in my home, and he was just banging at the door, so I let him in, and then there he was. But he's a nice cat. Anyhow, what's up?
About Joe Manchin, it's time for Biden to call him into the White House and tell him, Joe, you either play ball like a Democrat or I'll make sure West Virginia doesn't see a dime of infrastructure money. I'm curious as what you would do to get Manchin in line.
Well, I agree with the sentiment, Dale, although I think that probably with Manchin, since it seems that a lot of this is driven by his own I don't know if it's his ego or his hope to get reelected. I mean, you know, and there's probably bits of both that are involved. And you have to consider the politics of West Virginia, although there is a strong progressive movement in that state. But I would offer a carrot rather than a stick is where I'm going with that. I would instead bring Joe Manchin into the White House and say, Joe, you know, I would love to see the Joe Manchin, you know, bridge connecting West Virginia to Ohio, and I would love to see the Joe Manchin Thruway built, and I would love to see the Joe Manchin broadband system that, you know, will carry your name to people long after you're dead, and your children and grandchildren will be able to see all these things. And but I need your help to make this happen. That's how I would go about it. And Lyndon Johnson did a lot of that. And so did Franklin Roosevelt, frankly. You know, you can use the carrot, you can use the stick. LBJ is famous for the stick, but he did a hell of a lot more carrot stuff than just stick stuff.
I just think we need to do something to get him in line finally.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm absolutely with you on that. Dale, thank you for the call. Corinne in Minneapolis. Hey, Corinne, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. Just a couple quick things. I would like to piggyback with the woman who talked about the problems with the African-American farmers. About a year ago, The Atlantic had a long article, which every single person should Google and read, about the history, not history way back, but the history of, let's say, the last 30 years. It is heartbreaking how people could not get loans and, you know,
the destruction of black farms. I read that.
Oh, my goodness. Just heartbreaking.
It really was. And the main, you know, one of the main things driving it was that these were people who were already kind of hanging on by their teeth after, you know, as a consequence of centuries of at least a century of redlining and all these other, you know, structural things. And so then when when things get weak, they're the ones who fall off the edge.
Oh, my goodness. So I just recommend that article. And then just a little bit about Tom Vilsack, who is the new Secretary of Agriculture. You know, he was governor of Iowa, and I believe he also served in the Clinton administration, if I'm not mistaken. And for the most part, I thought he was a good governor. However, there are two things that I think we've got to watch with him. One is he did have, as a governor, a little bit of a tendency to favor corporations, the pork producers and whatever in Iowa, as opposed to small family farms. And so, you know, that's just something I think we should watch. And then you may remember the story of him, it's been in the news again a little bit lately, of his set to with an African-American woman who had been misrepresented in the press. I think I'm not sure if she worked in the Department of Agriculture, what her job was, but she was in the federal government somewhere. And she had been misrepresented in the press, and he fired her before he researched the whole story. And then
I remember the story.
The whole story came out. He tried to get her back in the Department of Agriculture recently, and she won't have anything to do with him. So, I just
once burned, twice shy.
That's just
I've also read about his connections to Monsanto, and it's troubling. But we're not going to have the Bernie Sanders administration here. It's not Bernie Sanders who's president, and not every person in the cabinet is going to be pure as the driven snow, or whatever the phrase is of the day. But step by step, things are getting better. Corinne, thanks so much for the call. Thank you for being with us today. I appreciate it. I hope it's been of value to you. And, you've got some ammunition for the water cooler wars. And let's not forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, which includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll & Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.